Everybody, good evening. Good evening, everybody. This work session of the Board of Education for May 4th, 2022 is called to order. For tonight's work session, materials have been posted in board books on the PPS website under the Board and Meetings tabs. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. I'll note that Director Hollins is joining us virtually, as you can see on the screen. And anyway, thank you all for joining us this evening. I see we have a full house. I love that. Those wishing to display placards and signs or banners must remain in the auditorium foyer behind the seating area and may not block any attendee's view of the proceedings. Also, I'd appreciate if you'd keep the walkways clear and the aisles clear. And in general, we just appreciate if you could be mindful of others in the room. Tonight, we'll have an opportunity to hear public comments on the superintendent's proposed budget for the 2022-23 school year. In order to make sure we hear from as many school communities as possible, we're going to make sure that each school has a chance to be represented at least once. Once we've gone through all schools who have a community member wishing to speak, we'll go back for another round of speakers. We understand we may have more people that want to speak than we have spots tonight, but we'll do our best to get through as many as we can in an hour. Following public comment, we'll then move into a work session on the budget, where staff will provide further details about the budget and share highlighted responses to questions raised by the board. We'll then have the opportunity for directors to continue discussing the budget proposal and asking questions of staff. Before we go on to public comment, I just want to offer a few reminders. Please make sure when you begin your comment that you clearly state your name and spell your last name. Each speaker tonight will have 2 minutes to provide comments, and we ask that you please honor that limit to allow for more testimony in order to make time for others who wish to speak. And you'll hear a sound after 2 minutes, and that means it's time to conclude your comments. I want to also let everyone know that we do have interpretation available should you need it. So you can let me know if you need interpretation, and we've got that on offer tonight, I'm really proud to say. Ms. Bradshaw, would you please call up our first speaker?
Yes. We have Young Yu.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Young Yu. Whoa. YU.
Powerful.
What level of understanding does the school board have of the racist history of standardized tests? How much instructional time do we lose at the expense of standardized tests in Title I schools? Has our school board looked into alternative assessments for student learning and understanding? What connections can be made between standardized tests and the school-to-prison pipeline? What good are math and reading scores if a student turns 18 and doesn't know how to emotionally self-regulate? Why are English language learners still counted as half and quarter students in this budget? What connections can be made between this policy and the 3/5 compromise? State funding provides around $4,300 per ELD student. Multiply that by our 3,737 PPS English language learners, and you have around $16 million. So why does the 22-23 budget only allocate $12 million for ELD? Why are we sending out propaganda saying no teacher cuts if you refuse to replace classroom teachers and eliminate those jobs through attrition? Those are cuts. Why are our nutritional assistants still making less than $15 an hour if we value them? Why do we have multiple high schools with only 2 custodians working in them? How many unfilled positions do we have for custodians, and how long have they been unfilled? This board has the power to reject the budget as it stands and take more time to ask questions. Who from this board would be willing to do that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Angela Bonilla.
Hello, Angela Bonilla, B as in boy, Onilla. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm a former Spanish DLI teacher. I'm a current instructional coach at Scott. And I'm speaking to request that you move to amend the budget to add more school-based student-facing positions. We need to invest our resources in our schools. As Student Representative Weinberg asked, when he asked if we would have less educators next year than this year, despite having no layoffs, Shannon Reese answered that PPS cut 88 full-time educator positions for next year. We will have 88 less student-facing school-based positions. This includes student-facing special ed positions. PPS says it's prioritizing Title, TSI, and CSI support schools. However, 16 of our TSI, CSI Title Kinder classes will have more than 20 students. 7 of them will have upwards of 24 students, with the highest class at 29. Pre-K ratios are 1 to 10. So you have students coming from preschools where they had enough attention, going into kindergarten classes where they have double the number of students and half the staff. How can we support student success when students expect support at 1 to 10, knowing that we will have students who are, couch to kinder and will need more support in their school readiness skills? You can also ask any kinder teacher. Numbers rise in the fall due to late enrollment. So 24 student average can easily become 26, 27, 28 students by October. Since the board has already chosen to supplement the budget with reserves, why not return staff to schools? Hire more educators, raise wages for our custodians and our nutritional service folks, and make sure that we have all the personnel we need to be able to run our schools successfully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine Paxton Williams.
May the fourth be with you. Hello,
Hello.
my name is Catherine Paxton Williams. That's P as in puppy, AXTON hyphen WILLIAMS. I didn't plan to speak tonight, so I just made my notes on my handy dandy media, which I brought with me. Before the pandemic, our schools were being cleaned to the moderately dingy level, which is the fourth. There are 5 levels, and it was the one above the bottom. And now we're at the abject neglect level. I'm happy to say I'm a teacher at Kelly Elementary. I've been teaching in Portland Public since 1998. And then before then, I was a student K through 12 in Portland Public Schools. So this is my district. We have a really good administrative team this year, and the only thing we talk about really in our monthly meetings with PAT and the principal is how our school is so unclean. We've been down a janitor since one of ours retired in the fall, and she's advocating, my principal is advocating, and we're down at the abject neglect level. We're down somewhere at the bottom, and it's not the custodians' fault. They're working so hard, but they're so short-staffed that we get our garbage emptied every night and the kids' bathrooms get cleaned, thank goodness. But the floors or the desks or anything else, we're doing that, and then we miss out on our prep times, and we don't want to take away work from our union brothers and sisters. That's not fair. Second, when I was here 2 weeks ago for the budget presentation, and it was said that special ed was getting fewer dollars because they'd have fewer students, I laughed out loud, and then I remembered where I was and stopped myself, because even if we are having fewer students, special ed has been so underfunded for so long that it's impossible for my colleagues to get their job done. Physically, there aren't enough minutes in a day, so really keep the levels up. Last, I was wondering if in the budget there's space for a cost of living increase and raises for all of your employee groups, because dang, we need it. And then last, in 2003, teachers worked 10 days for free, and we were told by the district that when things got better, they'd pay us back. And I'm hoping to retire maybe at the end of next year, so if we could get paid back soon, I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Colin Hawkins.
Hello. I'm Colin Hawkins. That's Hawkins. We are awash in need at this point. I work at one of our middle schools. We have beautiful children who come in every day, working really hard to come back from 2 years in the wild, as it were. I work in a very, very hard-hit community at Roseway Heights. We're surrounded by the Cully neighborhood. Homelessness is a huge problem where we are, as it is all over the city. And we have more need now than we've ever had before. And I'm hearing from the district that they want to cut roles, give us less. We've had promises made at our school that have never been fulfilled this year, let alone in the future. We were promised to have restorative justice programs that were staffed and had great people who had lots of education. We're going to bring that knowledge to us and train us. That has not happened. We were supposed to have personnel to give us a MTSS classroom where kids who were unable to go to class because of emotional needs or because they had been underrepresented for many years and socially promoted and couldn't perform in the classroom would be given time with teachers. We have no one in that room. That room stays empty. It's been fully furnished by teachers. We decorated it twice this year just to hopefully get somebody in there. There's no one there. We have a janitorial staff that is way overworked. And they are working really hard. And we have a food services person who has been there. She has to work to recover from lunch from one group to the next for 15 minutes. We have 3 lunchtime recesses because we've had to separate our students because of behavior problems that we're unsupported in actually processing and interrupting. The district has not given us the personnel to do that, and they refuse to actually honor Article 9, which would be staffed appropriately, and we would actually have interruptions for those students. We have an epidemic level of behavior issues that lead to violence. We have students being bullied. Our LGBTQ+ community is being bullied. Our students of every different ethnic background that is not white is being bullied by each other. They're not being supported. We get told that we're going to have affinity groups, and that is usually one person having lunch with 4 or 5 kids and bringing them lunch from McDonald's. That is not an affinity group. That is a lunch group. And they're having a conversation, that's great. And our SMS talking to a student after they've been in a fight and sending them back to class 5 minutes later is not restorative justice. That is a conversation. We need staffing, and we need to have actual words that are said to us and then backed up with staffing, money, follow through. We're tired of being lied to. It's every day.
Thank you.
Tiffany Robinson.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Tiffany Robinson from ROBINSON, and I'm from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School, the PTA president. We appreciate the continued investment in closing the opportunity gap for our children that this budget appears to prioritize. We ask the board to center equality and recognize the deep impacts systematic racism has had on our students' success when you make decisions about this budget. Holding the district's leadership accountable to closing the gaps between our students and their white peers should guide every aspect of the district's spending. The impacts of COVID-19 pandemic has hit Black and brown communities the hardest. We bore the impacts of more illness, more deaths, and less paid leave to care for family members. We also know that the economic impacts of COVID-19 landed on our communities the hardest, whether it was housing security, the cost of energy and food, or the sector suffering the deepest and longest lasting job losses. Despite our consistent efforts as families in the in the compatibilities of our children. They lag their white peers in achievement at every grade level. This is the fruit of long-standing inequality and deep systematic racism, both inside and outside of PPS. We didn't create the gap, and we can't close it alone. PPS's resources must directly flow to proven interventions and supports for our communities in close and honest consultation with our communities. The investment in culturally specific community partners in the Center of Black Excellence are important examples. Where white-collar families could supplement online learning, our communities struggle to stay housed and employed even at jobs that were exposed in COVID-19. So the targeted spending on opportunities for our children to catch up on lost learning is critical. We also know that our youngest students miss critical classroom skills development, so small class sizes are essential to their opportunity to catch up and begin successful school careers. Our PTA raises 1/10 of what PTAs 2 miles away from us could raise during the pandemic. We spent our budget helping our families stay housed and fed. Our families can't spend cleaning supplies to the classrooms to cover the gap in teachers' supplies budgets or pay to hire a bus for field trips like wealthy families in other neighborhoods. Despite how many jobs our families work, the resources described in the budget are critical to addressing the deeply unequal impacts of COVID, which layered on decades of deeply inequitable access to many other factors of success for our students, for the stable housing and intergenerational wealth. Our students should continue to be prioritized in the district spending. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Frankie Jean Boas Dennison.
Oh, yeah, Faze Dennison. Frankie Dennison, Dennison. Check. What I'd really like to say tonight is that I worry a lot about the disconnect between what you bring to the table, which is clearly rich in caring and understanding in your own individual perspectives. And what I see missing is collaboration. There is so much that happens at each individual school that we could not begin to describe to you in 2 minutes or 2 hours or 2 days. And we need you to see those things as they are lived by our students. And everybody who's spoken tonight has said a version of that, I feel like, in one way or another. And I appreciate, Board Member Green, that you do come out and then you do spend time. And we need everybody here on this board to do that, not as a token, but as a way of life. You have so much power and control. And what will happen with these teacher cuts, just one of a million examples, is that a class of 16 in a school that is diverse, Peninsula, will have 2 classes of 16 with extremely high needs. I have 7 students with IEPs. Not one of them has been met this year. And some students have had no service. But we're gonna cut special ed. I don't know what we're gonna do with that money that's gonna be more important than meeting the needs of those students, because none of us will be around when that student is out there failing when we could have prevented that. That is our purpose. And nobody in that class of 32 that's about to get made, children of color are gonna be impacted the most, again.
Thank you.
Amy Sylvia.
Hi. Amy Sylvia, Silvia. I'm the proud mom of 2 young ladies at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. I am also the lead cook at Maplewood Elementary, and I'm here tonight as the co-chair of SEIU 503 Local 140. Like everybody's already said, we need help. Our custodian friends and nutrition services, we're the backbone of the district. We keep the classrooms clean, the lights on, the students warm and fed, but we don't have enough people to do this work because our wages aren't competitive. And the proposed budget does not address this staffing. The staffing crisis affects the students' health and safety. We have over 70 vacant custodial positions. And that makes it impossible to get bathrooms clean, sanitize high-touch surfaces. And working in the kitchen, being short-staffed, means we're oftentimes really stressed out and the food quality suffers. Budgeting for competitive wages will actually save the district money. This year, PPS wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars on cleaning contractors because they lost more custodians than they hired. To keep our students fed, highly paid, like my manager comes in if I'm sick, and they're forced to leave their work and help us prepare lunches. So with Taco Bell starting new hires at $17.25 an hour, PPS wages starting at $4.40 an hour, which will be less than minimum wage July 1st, it just isn't enough. It's time for PPS to invest in competitive wages so we can hire and retain enough workers to ensure our schools are safe and healthy. It's time to invest general fund dollars to pay nutrition service workers living wages and bring equity to this historically underpaid, overwhelmingly female workforce. Please amend this budget to fund competitive wages so we can hire enough staff to ensure the safe and healthy schools for our students and staff deserve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Callie Eckberg.
Chair to pass?
Yes, Director Hollins?
I just wanted to get a quick clarification. Did she say 440 or 1440 an hour?
She said 440. I think she meant 1440. So just that's okay. Just dropped a 1 there in that. So it's 1440, but it's, I appreciate your clarifying question.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Callie Eckberg, Ekberg. I am a school psychologist in Portland Public, as well as the current president of the Oregon Association of School Psychologists. In 2020, Portland Public Schools failed to prioritize services to students with disabilities when school psychologists were the only service provider to experience a 5% FTE reduction, despite an increase in special education enrollment. I am here to request that the budget prioritize mental health and wellness and services to students with disabilities by equitably funding and acknowledging the critical services school psychologists provide. Now is the time to invest more resources in our students, not less. Instead of relief for growing caseloads, the 5% reduction was due to the special education department unilaterally changing our staffing formula, eliminating equity considerations for Title I schools and schools with special education-focused classrooms. The formula change resulted in an FTE reduction in 50% of Title I schools, as well as schools that include focused classrooms for students with disabilities who require higher levels of special education services. This year, we have experienced a staggering increase in special education evaluations. This cut in school psychologist FTE, as well as 16 schools experiencing school psychologist vacancies, has contributed to this increase in inappropriate special education referrals. School psychologists are included in the PPS suicide prevention policy and support suicide screening and prevention, behavioral safety assessment, and safety and support planning. Despite our critical role as members of the student service provider team, we are the only service provider whose work has gone unacknowledged by not being named along with school counselors and social workers in supporting students' health and wellness. School psychologists, counselors, and social workers all play a vital and mutually supportive role in supporting the mental health needs of students and families in our district. In closing, I ask the board to acknowledge the role of school psychs as mental health providers with unique training. I also ask the board to prioritize services to students with disabilities by equitably funding school psychologists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dinah Zadoff.
Hi, I'm Dina Zadoff. I teach second grade general education at Woodmere. It's a little pocket school, K-5.
Do you mind spelling your last name?
Sure. Z as in zebra, A, D as in David, O, F as in Frank, F as in Frank. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I really appreciate all the people that were able to make it, and knowing they stand for probably thousands more that would want to be here but have other things that they need to do, like families and such. I wanted to say that it's so, where do I begin? But I want to picture, I heard someone say, imagine if we took this time after the pandemic to just wrap these kids with love and arms and as specials and ways to be able to process what they're going through. And it's not over. There will be stuff going on for years and years. So how do we take our vision of cut, yeah, cut more? No, it can't sustain itself. Like the number of lawsuits that happen, say, when they cut the custodians during No Child Left Behind era. And then, well, what happens? The maintenance goes down. Now there's a lot of building problems like banging noises when we're teaching, rooms at 90 degrees, and those are the side things. However, if we could just invest and have a different vision, you would be a part of that, the district would be a part of it, and I think the only way to really get why we're bringing this up and why we're here is that we are suffering, we are on a shoestring. We cannot meet the needs of the kids that are learning English, special ed, and in poverty, or the kids whose families are working and don't get paid enough, a living wage, like the custodial staff, the kitchen staff, educational assistants, and they have a huge impact. But the biggest impact is consistency. We get to know kids, and then positions get cut. Oh, picture that. I'm going to end with picture the big hug love, because we can do better. When we do short-term things, reading scores go down, graduation rates go down, but you'll see long-term gains if you add to what we have, not even keep what we have. We need to add hundreds of positions to make it okay. I'm lucky I have a class of 23. I say that's lucky. I would say 7 are dealing with huge emotional issues from the pandemic, from all kinds of things, and I can't give them the attention that they really deserve. So I'm trying to be, hey, what can we do? Thank you.
Thank you.
Virtually, we have Angela Keeney.
Hi there. Are you ready for me?
Yes.
Okay, wanted to make sure I could be heard. My name is Angela Keeney. Last name is spelled Keeney, and I'm here on behalf of the Bridger Elementary Neighborhood Program, of which our family's in its 6th year. I have a 5th grader and a 2nd grader. It feels important to mention that as well as a parent, I'm also a licensed clinical social worker. So I'm using my professional lens along with my personal one in my advocacy for our school. I urge you to keep the needs of our school community next school year at the forefront, especially for our neighborhood program. The Southeast Guiding Coalition process has helped to highlight the challenges of the single neighborhood strand at Bridger, specifically with regard to large class sizes with no overflow plan, the inability to split up tricky classroom dynamics from year to year, and limited support for neighborhood teachers within grade-specific teacher teams. These challenges existed long before the pandemic and have only been exacerbated by the struggles and limitations of the past couple of years. This year in particular, our neighborhood classrooms are overwhelmed with the amount of needs and lagging skills our students are showing, academically, emotionally, and behaviorally. In volunteering regularly in my daughter's second grade classroom, I see firsthand how deeply impacted students are by outside stressors, lack of practice being in a classroom setting, and by learning losses. I can name over 10 students in that class alone that could use individualized support, and the teacher has shared this is the highest level of need she has had in over 20 years of teaching. Our third grade teacher shared recently that out of her 29 students, quote, 14 have significant or even intense social and emotional and/or academic needs. And my older daughter's fifth grade teacher has expressed feeling overwhelmed by the challenge of meeting so many diverse needs and such different academic levels within her class. This class, by the way, reached 32 students at its highest and is one of the most diverse classes in our school. The impact of these challenges on students' educational experience probably goes without saying. It also feels important to acknowledge the impact on our teachers and staff in witnessing such an intense level of need within their students without having the resources to have those needs met. The risks of low morale, secondary traumatic stress, and burnout are high. I know this has been an impossible year in education on all levels, not just in our school and district, but throughout the country. Focusing on Bridger, though, we are a school community with a lot of heart, an incredible team of teachers and staff, an amazing support network of parents and families. We are also a tired community, an always adapting community, and a grieving community. Many of you know we lost one of our fourth grade dual language teachers, Julia Collins, recently, who was not only an incredible teacher and beloved colleague, but also one of our fiercest advocates for creating an equitable, inclusive, and culturally responsible student and school environment for all Bridger families. Her
Ms.
absence
Keeney?
is monumental. Yep.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We have a lot of people signed up for public testimony, and we allow everyone 2 minutes. And I have let a couple people go on, so if you'll wrap your comments up quickly.
Okay, thank you. Let me get to my concrete asks for next year. Providing Bridger with a full-time social worker instead of a part-time one, as well as a half-time attendance and engagement coach, education assistance for ideally all neighborhood classrooms. And if that's not feasible, please consider the option of splitting EAs between 2 grades, one full-time staff that's split between second and third, for example, and more consultation for teachers and administration to better address student and staff needs and to implement classroom management strategies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Angel Courtney.
Hi, my name's Angel Courtney, Courtney. So I'm Angel, and my son Kale is a special education program at Franklin High School. A recent IEP meeting revealed that the best placement for Kale is outside of the current PPS model, as the resources needed to meet his needs do not exist within the PPS and will likely never exist due to upcoming and continuous budgetary cuts to one of the most vulnerable segments of our society, the special needs children. There's no compassion being shown here. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. There's no compassion being shown here. There's no services to those in need. There's only cuts to the funding that these extremely vulnerable children need in order to obtain the skills necessary to live a full life, a very same life you all enjoy. This affects not only my child, but all the future generations of at-risk special needs children. That is neither fair nor right. Kale has an array of special needs that aren't always easily met, and yet he approaches life with grace, class, and pure joy. What he and these children need and deserve is a special education program with appropriate staffing, funding levels to address his needs and carry him on to the next stage of his life as prepared as he can be. The PPS professionals that currently work with Kale are highly dedicated professionals that already work themselves into the ground for our special needs children. They work extraordinary hours, often perform work-related communications and support to families on their own off hours, thereby sacrificing their free time, and now being asked to do even more with sustainably less. I would like to believe that the Portland Public School District would strive to be a paragon of the special needs and special education model for success and inclusiveness, but instead continues to fail those it is intended to serve. These proposed cuts are bad look for each and every member on this board and PPS as a whole. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. May I just remind everybody that we have a lot of people that want to testify tonight, so I'd really appreciate your cooperation with sticking to 2 minutes. We're doing that so we can hear from as broad and as diverse people that are in the room. Thank you.
Isabel Johnson.
Hi, my name is Isabel Johnson, Johnsson. I didn't anticipate speaking tonight, so I'm a little nervous. I would have been nervous anyway, but this is how strongly I feel about the budget. I have a son, a third grader at Glencoe Elementary, is a neighborhood school. And when the budget initially came out and the teacher cuts were proposed in February, I was blindsided. I voted for the Student for Success Act, understanding that was going to mitigate the measures that had cut in the past. And I thought our class sizes were too high to begin with. And it never occurred to me they would get cut, that the teachers would be cut and we would have higher class sizes again. We're losing 3 FTEs at our school, and it means that our 3rd and our 5th grades will go from class sizes of 20 to or 20 or so to over 30. And I just know and it's not just our school, I have teachers, friends at other schools, and everything that seems to be the most important, or I can't say the most important, everybody's trying to do their best, and I just feel that there's this idea that it's like district versus teachers, and as a parent who volunteers in the school, I see teachers working so hard every day, and I just want them to be recognized, and the kids as well. I volunteer in the school, and the kids just want to be seen, and if you have large classes, they're not seen by their teacher, and that's what they really want. The kids want to be seen, and to be able to have that, they need small classes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Paul Cone.
Hello, my name is Paul Cohn. I'm wearing a Vestal shirt. That's our neighborhood school. However, my daughter attends Access Academy. I want to thank Vestal and their community for supporting Access and letting us use their space for the last 4 years. As you know, Access is an alternative program dedicated to meeting the unique needs of PPS's highly gifted learners. Many Access students need extra help with emotional and behavioral regulation, social support, learning disabilities. It's not uncommon for students to have ADHD, anxiety, autism, dyslexia, other differences. Every day, Access staff is stretched thin to meet so many complex and varying needs. When there isn't enough staff to help the kids who need it, and it impacts the learning opportunities of the whole class. I've actually been volunteering a lot over lunches and recess to help kind of manage the kids. Not all students at Access have diagnoses or extra needs, but our students do not necessarily possess effective classroom skills. One of the greatest challenges of teachers of gifted students is to help them stay engaged with school. It's impossible to properly support our students without robust levels of counseling and administration. This year, Access is staffed by 2.5 counselors, plus a graduate level intern counselor, 1 curriculum climate specialist, and 2 administrators. This team provides essential direct support to every student every day. The proposed budget will reduce Access staff to 1.5 counselors and a single administrator, and can't possibly serve this complex community in a meaningful way. PPS can and does allocate additional staffing to account for unusual school requirements or schools in transitioning situations. Some schools receive additional funding because of their socioeconomic makeup, their achievement data, unique needs of their DLI program. We are asking for the same flexible support for our students as we are both a school and with unusual requirements and one facing a significant transition. We've worked hard to maintain our community for 4 years despite being split between 2 distant campuses. Reuniting our community as we come out of a pandemic is a significant undertaking for our administrative and counseling staff. Access has been slated to lose 6 FTE overall. In order to maintain a safe learning environment, we particularly need our assistant principal and 2 full-time counselors. The kids will be the one who pay the price of additional destabilization during this time of significant change. Acknowledging the funds provided by the Student Success Act and all of those things, we're confident that you can, I'm sorry, I'm running out of time, but we're moving to Terwilliger. As you know, we're being recombined, and we're confident you can help us in that transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you mind spelling your name for us,
I'm
too?
sorry. Paul Cone, C-O-N-E.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
good to see you, Andrew.
Amy Fox.
I say my name.
For the record.
This is not my thing, but I'm going to do it anyway. Hi, Amy Fox, F-O-X. So thank you, everybody. I am a mom of 3 PPS students. I'm a teacher. I'm deeply invested in this community. And I know that everybody who's sitting here, everywhere here, is completely committed to making schools the best possible place. The question is always the details. The devil's in the details, right? And so let's pay attention to what our details are. We know, everybody knows that what makes schools better are more student-facing people. That's what they need. They need educators, janitors, nutrition workers, paraeducators that are all paid well, so they'll stay. It's so good when that happens. We have 88 less classroom teachers across the district, and the budget's $118 million more. Is that right? That seems so wrong. Special education cuts are so deep. A reduction of 26? Like, that's so, like 26 total positions. One of them, 13.5 learning center teachers. So that's 26 schools that are facing a reduction. 2 school side, like, it's so crazy to me. Like, don't we need more? A budget of 118 million more. My youngest is at Buckman, and she's looking at class sizes of 33 next year. So yeah, that sucks. So a budget is a moral sorry, it just does. A budget's a moral document, and what does this budget say? PPS is proposing that we spend more on programs and middle managers. It's just weird, and Every year we face cuts in our classroom. Budget surplus, cuts. Budget deficit, cuts. Just cuts. Just pain and suffering. I heard someone sitting before me saying that class size doesn't matter. So here's some research to refute that in case any of you believe that, because that's horrifying. Research has found that no particular threshold, okay, my ask, fine, my ask. I will give you research if you want it, I've got it. But please go back, look at your budget. This budget reflects your values. Why you come here and sit where you do today is because of that, right? You are in a unique position to be the hero of this story. You are a hero to our community, a hero to our students. Please do the right thing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Jules Bailey.
Sorry, juggling childcare. Literally. Yeah.
I'll snap a picture if you could raise her up a little bit to send to you later.
She's frowning now.
Okay. Those are the best photos, though, looking back.
I'm sorry, sweetie. We'll go back to your brother in a second. Hi, I'm Jules Bailey, and I'm not representing anybody. I am just here as a parent, and albeit a slightly frustrated parent. And I want to say first off that I understand enough about government to know that you have one of the hardest jobs in it. I also am acutely aware of the both statutory and constitutional hand that you have been dealt. But I want to be here tonight to tell you a little bit about my experience as a parent briefly, and it feels odd to be talking about my son at Capitol Hill Elementary, who is a very high-performing student, and to be advocating for him when there are so many other students who have basic needs that need to be met. But I hope you'll see the connection between those two things. When we take a look at the potential class sizes at Capitol Hill for next year, it's hard enough for Miss Casey right now to do her job with the class size that she has. And I see it firsthand. My son has scored over 99th percentile on both reading and math in TAG. It feels weird to brag on my kid in a public setting, but I have to advocate for him. The reality is he loves learning, but it breaks my heart when he comes home at the end of the day and he talks about being bored. And it breaks my heart when there aren't really the resources for him to feel like that's a place where he wants to be during the day. And yet when he comes home, he's doing math in his head, he's doing exponents, he's reading aloud Harry Potter with a British accent. It's hilarious. He loves doing this stuff. But the reality is that, I grew up in Portland Public Schools. I'm a product of Portland Public Schools. I want my children to be a product of Portland Public Schools. But there are a lot of parents like me that have privilege, that have kids in privilege that aren't going to make that choice. And if they have kids that are also feeling like they're not able to get the support that they want academically, they're going to make another choice and they're going to go somewhere else. And what that means is a spiral. That means there's less resources to also give to the kids that really need help there. And so I urge you to go back, look at class sizes, find a way to provide the support that's needed in the classroom so that teachers can do their job and take advantage of the opportunity that's given to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alicia Blackford.
My name's Alicia Blackford, Blackford. This is a very large budget with many facets, and while I beg you to consider that what all our students need most to succeed is more student-facing staff in all areas of their education and development, I'm here today to talk specifically about our English language learner population. For context, the staffing formula I'm about to discuss allocates FTE to schools based on the number of language learners they have, but weights those students differently based on their English language acquisition level from a test score. And it weights students with higher language acquisition as 50%, 25%, or 0% of a whole student. This new ELD staffing formula was introduced for next year with absolutely no input from community stakeholders. No ELD teachers, students, or families were consulted as it was drafted. The ODE says that staffing formulas must be approved by the school board, and this board has yet to do so. Yet this formula has already been implemented to determine EL teacher staffing numbers for next year. The staffing allocation formula is what represents our values for our English learners, and what you would be approving is a formula that ranks some students as less than others simply for the school they attend, and that ranks 75% of our EL population as less than a full human in terms of resource allocation. Are you comfortable standing behind a system that counts Black and brown immigrant students as less than whole people? Are you comfortable looking into the face of a newcomer student and their family and telling them that because of their decision, whether by choice or by necessity, to stay at their neighborhood school rather than traveling to one of our 2 PISA campuses, they will receive about half as many resources as those who do travel to a PISA campus? Newcomers do need more. They need more time, support, instruction, and resources than other students. But that in no way means that other English learners need less than what we are already giving them. These students still need language instruction, literacy supports, case management, scaffolding, and other classes. I've been timing it, and a phone call to a non-English speaking family using translation services takes an average of 16 minutes for what would be a 5-minute conversation in a single language. So while even just communicating with these families takes over 3 times as long, the district is proposing that these students count as 0.5, 0.25, or 0 students in staffing the ELD program. This formula is damaging, inequitable, and wrong. Please do not approve it. And since I have extra time, y'all are cutting a whole lot of sped. 2 intensive skills sped teachers, 2 social emotional skill teachers, 13.5 learning center teachers, 2 school psychs, 2.5 qualified mental health positions, and 4 SLP positions, 1 on feeding team, 3 in school buildings. No.
Ms. Blackford, I just want to, for the record, make a correction on something that I think I understand, and that's that nobody here is ever counted as a half of a person. I've heard it said that I've heard the language 3/5 of a person, which is personally insulting, but it's a multiplier, which means it would be 1.5.
No, so you are misunderstanding the staffing policy. Newcomer students are counted as 1.5 if they are at their neighborhood school. If they go to a PISA school, they're counted as 2.37. But as your proficiency level goes up, you are counted as 1, and then it lowers 2.5, 0.25, and 0. We can give you, we have all the pictures that we were given by the district, so I need the
Superintendent, could you clarify this point? Because I think it is important to understand this funding allocation so we can be clear.
Sure, we'll cover it in our discussion a bit later as far as our student formula, our weighted student formula, so that there's clarity.
It is a multiplier by 0.5, 0.25, and 0, not by 1.5.
I'm suggesting it's additive, but I'm looking forward to the conversation. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Emily Golden Fields.
Hello, my name is Emily Goldenfields. That's GOLDEN-FIELDS. So as a parent of 2 PPS students, I saw the toll the pandemic took. My youngest had online kindergarten, learning to read and count online, never hugging a teacher or making a friend in person. As a shy child, my daughter still suffers the consequences of missing kindergarten. She didn't learn how to take turns, share materials, apologize, or wait in line. Like students throughout the district, her school is losing positions. 2 educators. This is at Llewellyn Elementary. So she is facing a 2nd grade class of 32 students. As a parent, and I know other parents feel this way too, we have a feeling of betrayal. We kept our kids in schools. We did online school in kindergarten. It's the most depressing thing you've ever seen. We buttressed the public school system throughout this pandemic, and our payback is losing educator positions and a return to unconscionably large class sizes, buses that don't run, and classrooms that don't get cleaned. I'm also a substitute teacher. I've been mainly working in middle school this year, and I see serious skill gaps. I see dysregulation. I'm trying to teach argumentative writing, 5-paragraph essays to 6th graders, but the majority can't read the clock. They can't read the face of a clock. So I'm actually going to make that my mission to have them be able to tell time in 6th grade. This is the majority of 6th graders who I teach. I teach ELL students who need so much more attention that they're getting to just form basic writing, form basic sentence structures. Middle schools across the district are losing educators, and they'll have numbers in the 30s across the district in their classes. So we hear about responsibility, higher expenses, and fiscal cliffs. I don't know what the future holds, but I can tell you one thing with certainty. If the goal of the district is to bring parents back to PPS, cutting 88 positions and having class sizes soar back up will not achieve that. It's how you actually break public education. Please cut class sizes, not teachers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle Dewberry.
My name is Michelle Dewberry, Dubbarry. I am a mom of 2 third graders at Beach Elementary School. And I've been here before sounding the alarm about class sizes. Parents at Beach started sounding this alarm from the second we started kindergarten with my children, and their class had 32 kids. I don't know how the board can listen to these stories that I've heard tonight and not feel this responsibility to do something. Last November, parents in my kids' class organized a petition. 200 parents, 86% of staff at Beach signed the petition. We were begging for help, for more teachers. And I didn't get a single response. The email went to each of you. I didn't get a single response. We're begging you for help, for more teachers. And when I heard that teachers in elementary schools were getting cut, it felt like a betrayal. And I don't know what else to say. So I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Virtually, we have Stephanie O'Leary.
Hello, Stephanie O'Leary, O''Leary. I'm a parent of a creative science kindergartner. You've heard from so many tonight saying that we need student-facing faculty and staff. I would like to reiterate this need and the incredible effect the budget cuts will have on all of our school communities. For the 22-23 school year, our school is facing a small reduction in full-time employment that will have a huge impact on our community. The SCGC process has meant great uncertainty about the location and future of our school, particularly for our 6th through 8th graders. This has contributed to a small reduction in our enrollment. The subsequent reduction in full-time employment currently means losing our beloved kindergarten educational assistant, or EA. Our kindergarten EA is an integral part of our kindergarten team, highly skilled in supporting our youngest students as they navigate being part of a community, building vital literacy and math skills, and learning to be safe and joyful at school. Due to the reduction of FTE, our EA position is cut to half-time. This means not only will the amount of support for our kindergarten students be reduced, we will lose a highly skilled long-time staff member from that position, as she would have to take another placement. Just this small amount of FTE is needed to preserve this position and support our students. A relatively small restoration of FTE would have a huge positive impact on our students. We appreciate that the intention of these changes is for the greater good, but we ask that PPS help make the transition of our school. All I ask, I'm just gonna do my ask. You've heard from everyone. We just need our staff, and I'm just here to iterate that even at our school, which is experiencing a small reduction, it has a huge impact. So please, please help our school communities by restoring staffing and faculty reductions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kari Harrison.
Hello, my name is Carrie Harrison, first name spelled K-A-R-I, last name H-A-R-R-I-S-O-N. I am a paraeducator at Peninsula Elementary. I am currently on workers' comp because a kindergartner hit me in the chest. And I am not in the classroom, and I will probably not be in the classroom for the rest of the year. When I started in November, I had a week with the teacher before she went on leave. My time period before Christmas was having children jump on me from tables and other places, doing very unsafe things. It didn't get any better with the new year. We had a COVID shutdown for the classroom. We had a maintenance issue that forced us to move into a new classroom. We have had inconsistent and often unlicensed teachers in the room, and many of them, and some days with none. We recently got a brand new child who had never been in a CB classroom before. And that caused more disruption. Since January, I go home almost every day with bruises on my body from children hitting me, and not really realizing that they're there till I go to bed at night because I've just become numb to it. When this happened, it was shortly after the new student arrived, and we were trying to get him on board, and our most violent child in the classroom hit me in the chest. I worry every day about my students and their ability to succeed and what is going on because I'm not there, because there's no one to fill me. There's no one to backfill me, and we don't have enough staffing as it is. I think there's two problems. I think that there is a huge dissonance between what happens here in these halls and what actually goes on in the classroom, and I think there are serious financial problems as well. Yeah, I'm very saddened. The teacher did come back for 2 weeks before she went back on leave, and I think when I tried to bolster her courage because she is hurting, I told her I am 48 years old, and this is the most effed up job situation I've ever been in my life. And if it wasn't such a good fit for me as a person, I wouldn't be here.
Thank you.
Virtually, we have Johnny West Foyle.
We can't
Hi.
hear you. Oh.
Sorry about my voice. I have a cold. My name is Chani Westfoyle. That's spelled W-E-S-T hyphen F-O-Y-L-E. I have two kids at Scott Elementary in Northeast Portland. Scott is a CSI Title I school, and this year has been one of the most difficult our teachers' careers. And parents, children, teachers, and staff have all really struggled with the stress and trauma of coming back to school with a pandemic that's still happening. At this time, what our kids need more than anything are face-to-face support staff. We need teachers, we need special education staff, we need counselors, we need support staff in every classroom. We need cafeteria workers and bus drivers and custodial staff. We need people who will listen to kids and work to help them in whatever way they can. We need more staff and teachers talking to kids every day. The district has to invest in reducing the ratio of teacher to student. The budget's focus for next year specifically stated that the intent is to, quote, increase learning opportunities and, quote, provide high quality emotional, mental health, and wraparound supports. How can we do this if staff are being cut? How can we do this if teachers and staff keep being asked to do more with less? Some amazing teachers leave beloved schools because they're pushed to teach huge classes, and that's not what kids need. At Scott specifically, we're looking at moving to 2 combined 4th and 5th grade classes in both our English Scholar and DLI programs, depending on our enrollment levels in the fall. And this is despite the board's 2018 recognition that co-located programs do much better when there are multiple strands per grade. As we plan for next year, PPS has the opportunity to show real leadership in strengthening our school communities, starting with providing enough staff to meet the needs of our students and to retain our talented educators. Please prioritize putting kids in front of teachers and staff who care about them. They need the support. Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you say what school you were with? I didn't hear.
Scott Elementary.
Thank you.
Jim Diark. Is Jim Diark still here? Okay. Annie Larry.
Good evening. My name is Annie Larry, L-A-R-R-Y. I am coming as a concerned parent of a disabled child. And my child is a student with Franklin High School. And we want to enhance the lives of individuals with developmental disabilities by helping them reach their highest potential through training, education, employment, housing, social opportunities in a safe, healthy, and stimulating environment, preserving their dignity, independence, keeping them motivated and celebrated.
Ms. Larry, do you mind
Yes.
if I interrupt you? Because there's some static. I don't know what's happening there. Oh, Director. No, he's on mute. They're also on mute. Thank you. I want to make sure we capture everything you say.
Okay. We want to enhance their lives with students with developmental disabilities. We want to enhance their lives by helping them reach their highest potential through training, education, employment, housing, social opportunities in a safe, healthy, and stimulating environment, preserving their dignity, their independence, keeping them motivated and celebrated, working to create a world where each child, either born with a disability or due to circumstances or trauma, is given support necessary to participate fully in life and have dreams and hopes. An applied behavioral analyst, a sexuality therapist, special ed educator, occupational therapist, speech and language pathologist, mental health social worker, employment specialist, developmental psychologist, an attorney, and legal assistant. These are services my child has needed for 17 years and continues to need these services. I understand there's increased caseloads, funding to purchase resources, increase in class size, and reduced professional development opportunities, but will the IEPs be rewritten? This contract is between the parents and the school district that list all the services, therapies, and accommodations your child will receive, and adapting classroom content to their particular needs. According to the federal law, public schools must provide children with disabilities a true opportunity and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. As parents, we mourn our children's lost potential, but they are human beings with needs and dreams, and I'm grateful for the professionals and teachers who care and support my child through increased knowledge, skills, patience, literacy, and love. And Jesus said, "What you do to the least of these, you've done unto me." Thank you.
Thank you.
Rachel Haynes.
Hi, Rachel Haynes, Rachelhanes. I just want to start by saying that every child needs to feel safe, warm, fed, and healthy. So we need to have those basic needs met. So we need well-paid custodial staff and nutrition workers. I mean, that's just fundamental. Another thing, I saw in the budget report that it said that elementary schools were gaining 64 FTE. And yet I look at the list, the latest numbers, and it's a net loss of 53.71. And this is the most recent numbers. And I'm just going to read some of the schools that have at least one class size of 30, and some have more than that. Alameda losing 4.95. Atkinson, Beach, Creston, Dunaway losing 2.13, Forest Park 0.5, Payhurst 1.7, Glencoe 3, Grout 2.14, Lewis 2.20, Sabin 2.70, Whitman 2.64. I teach at Glencoe, and one of our positions that we're losing is our reading specialist, reading intervention specialist. So that is somebody that's serving the kids with the most need at our school, one of the groups of kids with the most need. And that's the position that we're losing. We're going from, our numbers are not accurate on here. We have 65 second graders, and there will be 2 third grade classes. So it's 32, 33. We are also going to have from 3 to 2 5th grade classes as well. People have said it over and over, that class size really does matter. And I just want to say redirecting our resources that could be spent on student-facing positions for private contracts seems really unacceptable at this point in time. We need kids with adults in the room. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moira Finnegan.
Good evening. My name is Moira Finnegan, last name spelled Finnegan. I had shared a packet of papers. Great. Awesome. You have them. Okay. I've worked in special education in PPS for 10 years. I've worked at many schools during my time in PPS, from kindergarten through post-high school services for young adults. I love my job. It's challenging, but it's very fulfilling. I know I am making a difference in the lives of my students. I'm here tonight because I want to urge you not to make any cuts to special education next year. While the overall PPS student population is decreasing, the number of students in need of special education services is actually increasing. Yet we are projected to lose 23 special education positions that directly support students. You can see which 23 positions are being cut in the spreadsheet that I've shared with you. And that is the spreadsheet that at the top says the special education staffing allocations, comparison between current year and next year, teachers, speech language pathologists, school psychologists, qualified mental health professionals, PTs and OTs. There's a second spreadsheet that looks at a comparison between this year and next year, which lists paraeducators, therapeutic intervention coaches, and records clerks. If you would take a look at those numbers, you'll see that we're losing 9 special education teachers, also called learning center teachers, 4 speech language pathologists, 2.5 qualified mental health professionals, 1.4 school psychologists, and 1 occupational therapist. We are already stretched so thin after dealing with one of the most challenging school years we've ever experienced. Our students deserve more. Please restore the special education budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Britt Marsh.
Hello, my name is Britta Marsh. That's B-R-I-T-T-E, last name M-A-R-S-H. I want to speak on behalf of teachers who have been lost and teachers who never will be. I am a former full-time teacher, K-12, ELA, ESL, the arts. I am now a member of the great teacher exodus of the 2020s. I left the profession not because I didn't love my students, not because I didn't love being in a classroom and the art of stewarding students to their highest potential. I left because of moments like this, where time and time again I see our community leaders decide to pull the rug out from under teachers and students by making it harder for teaching and for learning to happen. Where time and again, those in power have the choice to build, but instead they break. I marched in the Red for Ed march years ago, and I was standing next to a teacher whose sign said, "My entire career was a budget cut." She was 70 years old. She had been in PPS for 35 years. How is that possible? And is that moment again? My cousin Ellie, she's watching right now. She is tuning in right now. She is 18 years old. She's starting PSU in the fall, and she has expressed to me since she was in middle school that she wants to be a health teacher. She's kind and loving. She's loyal. She's like me. And I have implored her in the depths of my being, because I love her, do not go into this profession. Do you know how heartbreaking that is for someone who has loved in this profession? I have told her this because of times like this where I see that no one has your back except other teachers. And she's making a decision tonight whether she's going to pursue this career, and you have the power to prove me wrong. Please, you lost me. Please don't lose her. And please, let's not lose any more teachers. Support teacher retention.
Thank you.
Chair to pass, that is everybody who has signed up.
Thank you. So it looks like we went a little bit long, but we also started late this evening. Thank you, all of you, for your comments. Yes.
What was your name, ma'am? Grace whom?
Groom.
We had one person that missed out because they weren't here, so she could essentially take her.
That'd be fine. That's my decision to make, but
That concerns me because there may be other people in the similar boat.
I agree.
We're accessing it in an equitable way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so I'm sorry. I know we've heard from you, and I appreciate your passion. We're going to move on because we have this is the first of 3 meetings. And I think we had 30 spots open at 2 minutes each, so we allotted 1 hour for public testimony. So if you didn't make it, I'm hoping you can make it next time. I just took notes for the people that testified, just so you know, geographically, and we heard from 3 people from North Portland schools, 3 from Northeast Portland, 6 from Southeast Portland, and 1 from Southwest Portland that of the schools I know, and I just wanted to share that the geography and who we're hearing from. And I'm sorry, Ms. Groom.
Chair DePass, can I ask a question? I don't know if staff could clarify when the next opportunity for testimony is. It's coming up, and then I would just ask, Chair, if the 2 people who have said so far they signed up online, if we could make sure they're signed up at the beginning of our next session.
That's great. Yes, thank you. Can we do that, Ms. Bradshaw?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. It is, Roseanne, do you want to give the email?
It is publiccomment@pps.net. It will be shared.
And that comes to everyone, and that's a great way to advocate for your position in a way that we all receive.
Chair DePass, just given the really condensed budget timeline that we have between now and approval and then now and adoption, it would be helpful, I don't know, and even if we don't have an answer tonight, to be able to share with people when other opportunities will be, just so people can plan for that. I thought it was great geographic representation, but it's 10 people, or it would be good to be able to share in advance when other people will have opportunities before we actually vote on the budget.
Thank you. I'll take that under advisement. And again, we had 2-minute spots. We didn't all go for 2 minutes and 1 hour. So the math works out right, and it's an imperfect system. And to that end, yes, we'll work on communicating when people can and how people can advocate. Thank you for that. We'll take a 5-minute break. I think Chair Lowry already, or 2 minutes. I'm getting the eye over here. Let's do a 2-minute break, stretch break. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I can see that there's a lot of value in just moving around and getting to connect with colleagues and friends. We're going to thank you for all of those of you who made comments, and welcome back. Superintendent, would you like to start us off for this work session?
Yes, thank you, Chair DePass. Lots of places we could start, but I'm glad that this evening we're dedicating it on, once again, discussing our budget proposal for 2022-23, and I want to make sure that we get to a couple of areas, some of which I think can be clarified rather here, and then highlight some other areas that I know are of interest and also big topic areas. I do appreciate the opportunity. I know staff has to hear directly from members of our community this evening. During last week's meeting, staff captured comments and questions raised by directors, and we've provided responses now to those requests for further information. These have been shared with you. This information is posted with this evening's materials. Included in there, I know other folks have noticed it's there, is updated staffing information as of this past Friday, April 29th, which we'll have Dr. Adams provide a quick summary of this evening. He also provided the board with an accompanying memo he'll speak to, which includes a summary of year-over-year staffing changes, along with those class size projections and other summary data. We do recognize that class size is an important lever to increasing learning opportunities for students. We've also outlined for the board the proposed investments in other strategy areas, including extending learning time and opportunities, a robust summer school program menu, expanding access to courses like middle school electives, visual and performing arts, career technical education. And then just to recap, we're going to continue providing families with the option to enroll in PPS Online Learning Academy. Some other key priority areas that we've spoken to is making sure that we provide those high quality emotional, mental health, and wraparound supports, that we make investments to bolster that. We recognize that professional learning time is important for our educators so they can have additional time to plan, collaborate, and prepare. Making meaningful progress in some of our other communities' other top priorities, like supporting our school communities to promote Black and Native American student success, developing a diverse, high quality, and thriving workforce, reducing the district's impact on the environment. These are some of the listed items that we've spent a little time talking about. But of course, the urgency to address the unfinished learning, particularly as a result of the impact of this pandemic we're working through, you've noticed, hopefully, the hiring of additional learning specialists to help identified students become proficient in reading math, expanding those credit-earning courseworks for our high school students so they have the opportunity to stay on track to graduate. And we've already talked about the robust menu of summer programming, the largest in district history. So for this evening, like last week, staff's going to continue to capture any questions that are raised tonight. For that reason, I'm joined here tonight by various senior staff. Staff, please raise your hand. District staff here at the central office. So we representing a variety of our departments who are charged with leading many of the strands of work in our school system. They're here to listen. In some cases, they may be offering a quick, short, immediate response, but as a team, we'll be providing fuller written answers to all of your questions following tonight's meeting. Before we dedicate the majority of the time to hear directly from directors, we do want to provide a few updates. As I shared last week, our budget process is iterative, especially as we become aware of newly announced revenue sources or fine-tune some of our program cost estimates. So our CFO, Norberto Delgadillo, is going to provide a budget summary update. He's going to highlight what we called some of the double click or the proposed spending of our one-time ESSER and our ongoing SIA state money, so there's clear around where those revenue streams and what proportion of them are going to each of these strands of work. Well, that'll be followed by Chief Dr. Adams reviewing our updated staffing informations, and then I'm going to have our special education services leaders speak to the topic with some highlights, as well as our ELD program administrators, given there were some questions there on our staffing formula, which we want to clarify. So with that, Alberto, all yours.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero. Good evening. Chair DePass, directors, Student Representative Weinberg. Over the course of the past week, it's only been a week. It feels like much very long week. Since we last met, you've begun to process information and sent staff questions. We've answered a handful of questions and know that there's more questions, and some of them we'll get to tonight. And we also know that there's additional questions that are coming in, and we'll get back to the directors over the next few days. And really, thank you for the questions, as not only it helps with the opportunity to provide additional clarity, because it is not it's a very technical document, but also an opportunity to ensure we highlight some of the great work that is still happening, and that is happening, and some of the great plans that are being put in place for the upcoming year. And so with that in mind, I'd just like to spend a few minutes on a report that was shared with the directors, and it was posted online as well, that highlights the $120 million plus of targeted investments to support our key themes. And the report is organized by strategic themes, and I know I probably should have given Rosanna a heads up, because she did ask on the record, she did ask if I was going to present or share something, and I told her no. But being here, seeing this, I think there's an opportunity to probably display the report that we're looking at, and so if it's on board book, and it's our SRSIA double-click FY23-24 document. That's one of them. That's our one-pager, but really it's a pivot table that helps shed some additional details by theme across some of the key funding sources in our budget. And my apologies for not sharing that information, but I believe you all have a copy of the pivot table, and some of the key themes there are some of the key ideas. There's just the strategic themes. In addition to, we've added the summer planning dollars. So that's one big additional funding source that we're very appreciative, and that's almost $8 million. And we've carved that out as well in this report to help show how it's being spent. When we first introduced this information, it was high level by theme. And since then, with this information, we now have I thought I heard a voice, sorry. We now have broken it down into this additional layer of information so that you all can see some of the initiatives that are being supported under those themes. And when we look across, for example, address unfinished learning as a result of the pandemic, I won't go through each line item, but just kind of orient folks around the report. If you would double click under that theme, you'd see initiatives under Expand Student Tutoring Services, High School Credit Recovery, Learning Specialists, Summer Learning and Enrichment Programming. And as an example, with the Expanded Student Tutoring Services, there's $1 million dedicated from the ESSER funding source to support that initiative. And if you continue down the report, we also have COVID-19 response and our FEMA hold on that. And I do want to just spend an extra minute on that, because what that means, so the Federal Emergency Management Agency has told us that we may be eligible for certain expenditures to be reimbursed. And over the course of the past 2 years, those rules have changed. It's been different representatives from FEMA, different requirements, different asks. So it's been this ongoing process of trying to get eligible expenditures reimbursed by FEMA. If they reimburse us, that would be phenomenal, because then it releases these ESSER dollars. Otherwise, if we were to invest these dollars or do something else with this hold, and then FEMA comes back and says, you know what, these aren't eligible after all, that's a hit to the general fund. And already the general fund, as we've had conversations around where we are with its status, would just make it even more difficult, because it would ultimately require us to dip into our fund balance even more. So when we think about FEMA, it's this opportunity to try to get some additional dollars from the federal government to then release ESSER dollars. the timeline for that has been a big question mark across the country. This isn't just an Oregon thing. It's happening when I talk to my peers across the country at other districts. Everyone's having the same experience. Some folks have already given up and say, you know what, we're tired of waiting on FEMA. We're just going to go ahead and expense it against ESSER and move on, because it does require time. There's time with our limited resources as well to like, okay, now they're asking for this additional detail. We got to go talk to payroll, or we got to go reformat the report. And it's this ongoing process that you can imagine for 2 years. And as we think about that hold, then it's for how long do we continue to hold it? And really, when we think about the life of ESSER, we need to spend down ESSER by September 2024. So for the purposes of trying to give FEMA a chance, for the purposes of trying to preserve general fund, we should give ourselves another year and hold off on spending those ESSER dollars until we have further or additional clarity from FEMA, but before we get into that final year of spending spending the ESSER dollars.
And it's not actually hold off on spending them, it's that we don't have them.
Correct.
And we are not guaranteed that we will get them.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee that we would get those FEMA reimbursements. So, long story short, it'd be prudent to continue to hold those dollars in ESSER until we get additional information from FEMA, which can take up to at least give ourselves a timeline of 12 months. So I want to pause there and just see if there's just some questions around that.
It doesn't sound surprising.
There's other agencies, not just school districts. There's other agencies that have experienced delays, and so it's a holding, it's like standby pattern, holding pattern.
So just to make sure I understand. So we'll wait till we see that whether we're going to be reimbursed or not as a way to protect general fund. If it's not reimbursed, we haven't expended the funds, so it's no harm, no foul on the. That's the first part of the question.
No,
you have expended.
We have expended the funds.
But so you're saying we're not going to count on the reimbursement coming back in until it gets approved.
Until we get what? I'm sorry.
Until it's
at least 12 months from now, or yeah, because in order to submit the reimbursement request to FEMA, you have to have already expensed the action, had to have already occurred.
They were qualified expenditures under ESSER, and then this would be a secondary source that could come in for reimbursement, which would mean that we got $14 million more back in our ESSER fund for our last year to deploy them in next year's budget.
And it'd be $12 million.
Let me ask.
Yeah.
So that was a foundational piece of it. So the federal government reimburses us for it, mid-year. How does that then get? Will the superintendent come back to us with a proposed plan, or will it'll just be rolled over into the next year's?
Well, that's the conversation for us to have, right? Because we see what's happening with our fund balance. We know that as impactful as you see this coming year's budget, it's the one after. We have to concern ourselves with: are we banking enough to, not have to make dramatic shifts? We will have to identify trade-offs and reductions in the following spring, but this would provide an unexpected cushion. We're hoping for it. It's not an insignificant amount. We had to cover those expenses we have. They're ESSER eligible, but we're hoping FEMA comes through as well. So,
I guess what I'm asking is, will will we have that discussion whenever the approval happens? So then we could make that decision, but it wouldn't just be automatically made. It would be a conversation coming back about the issues you just raised.
Correct.
And we would also need to update our report to ODE, to the Oregon Department of Education as well, on our spending plan, on our ESSER spending plan, yeah.
Dr. Scott? question. I'm not sure. I was actually wondering if you could just spend 30 to 60 seconds recapping the overall fiscal situation again for the district. I was excited to hear from folks tonight, and I thought we got some really good testimony. On the other hand, most of the testimony was focused on retaining our teaching positions, which is something that I would certainly love to do. I won't speak for my colleagues. I imagine that everyone up here would love to do that. But we also have the fiscal responsibility of making sure we balance the budget. And I just want, if you could recap, there is a shortfall that is real. We are already proposing to use $40 million of our reserve. So if you could just recap that.
Absolutely.
And then I'm going to have some questions about trade-offs.
Yeah, I went straight to how we're going to invest, opportunities to invest some of our targeted funds, but there is still the case of the general fund. And when we last spoke, compared to our adopted budget, we are seeing that our expenditures are growing to approximately $40 million more than what we had budgeted this year. And some of the key drivers there are across our investments in people. Our investments in maintaining the staffing plan, or I say maintaining, but actually we've improved it. And ultimately, what that's causing is a imbalance. I think that's the right proper.
Expenses growing faster than revenues.
Expenses are growing faster than revenues, and so when that gap we have in front of us is causing us to dip into our savings account to close that gap. To be able to legally submit a balanced budget, we're having to dip into our reserves. And so then that puts the case in point around the opportunity to invest our general fund dollars, to invest in a staffing plan, to invest in the other initiatives that maintain our core operations is causing us to dip into our fund balance. And then we still have another bucket of revenue, which is our special revenue funds, which introduce opportunities for more targeted investments. So let me pause there, and I specifically say that to help create that distinction, because it is this interesting dichotomy where we have to make reductions, we have to dip into the fund balance, but then we also have these other funds to increase investments or do these additional investments. Some of these funds cannot cross over. Some of these funds are one time, and you can't count on them to be there in the long run. So it's some dynamics that we're having to contend with, and so when we propose the balanced budget, it's taking into account all the different variables to help support not just the core programming, but support additional investments in some needed targeted areas.
And I think, sorry if I could just follow up on that, because I think, and it kind of gets back to the chart that we had up there a minute ago. The budget is proposed by the superintendent. Again, it balances by using a significant portion of our fund balance. It also invests those one-time dollars in supports for our students in terms of making up for learning loss, and I think you can see those in different places. But it does not use those one-time dollars to retain teaching positions. It does.
It does. Yes.
Thank you. $14 million retained. It does not use more than that. The policy trade-offs we're talking about, and I think, and again, I'm really glad some people who testified stuck around. I wish more had, because this is really where a lot of the information, and I think the really important information about these trade-offs is, in order to fund those teaching positions, if in fact the board does that, we will be taking funding away. We'll be using the one-time funding that is currently programmed in the superintendent's budget for some of those classroom supports. Again, so there's a trade-off there. We can maintain those teaching positions we'll take away, and I think this will be a good opportunity for you and your team to talk about why you think those investments are the best use of those one-time dollars. Also noting, and I'll just note this, that use of those one-time dollars for teachers would keep them for a year, and we would probably be doing massive layoffs next year. So again, it would be a very short-term solution of those dollars. But there are other reasons, right, why you want
to I think that's right, Director Scott. I mean, what's critical is to make sure we sort of have a balanced set of strategies. We're also interested in doing the best we can to have optimal class size ratios, and you see it called out as a specific line item. When you look under category of increased learning opportunities, you see that we've tried to spread that out across our funding or our revenue sources. There's a bit of general fund. We know that Student Success Act, SIA, that was the spirit of the legislation, is to make a portion of investment there. We do $6.5 million under increased learning opportunities for students towards class size, and then we're also thinking about those one-time federal dollars to also decrease what could be a severe impact given our student enrollment to try to maintain and make an incremental progress towards class sizes. So you see $7.3 million in ESSER being spent. Now, we know there's a small balance of ESSER left for all of the activity that we're resourcing this year, this coming year, and this summer, or we would have to make decisions about, well, with $10 million left, where should we invest that? You just heard, this additional sort of possibility of a FEMA reimbursement. That would be another 10 or 12. So you add what we have in the 10 and the 12, we can think about now for fiscal year 24, if we want to continue to sort of not have experiencing a dramatic reduction of educator positions, for instance, we can choose to invest them in that area. And what we learn in the coming school year as being most helpful and impactful to students who have all these various needs. So we've tried to, we believe it's a coherent set of strategies that will improve conditions, learning opportunities, and outcomes for students. And we also want to make sure that our staff across all employee groups also experience some supports. But you heard it tonight. The social emotional supports and other areas and other wraparounds are going to be critical again in this coming school year. So we've tried to present a very well-rounded budget proposal that tries to be responsible about general fund ongoing, some thank you, voters, SIA, as well as how do we leverage these one-time monies to build capacity across the district without becoming dependent on monies that are going to go away, which could result in a dramatic situation in the coming spring.
But Superintendent, I think it's really important that we talk about those one-time monies in terms of the student-facing positions that they are supporting, because a lot of times the conversation gets narrowed to just talk about classroom teachers, and it's true with our dramatic declining enrollment, we will have fewer classroom teachers next year, but all those investments of these one-time dollars, the vast majority are student-facing positions. And I think it's really important for the public to know that and for that to be clear.
Yeah, it's important to recall that there was a lot of input gathering from our community, back when the student investment account was a proposed, larger investment in our district. We know we didn't get that full revenue in the first year, but we're experiencing now. And so I think it's the same priorities that our community has, and now we've had ESSER to really kind of double down in some of those areas. But you're right, Director Constam, the fact that we have the counselors, the social workers, all of the other added student-facing direct service staff, is I think a good case study. You can look around the state. You had districts spending their money on capital projects. You had their districts making other choices that you didn't see anywhere in our portfolio of investments with SIA or ESSER, for that matter, once we took care of health and safety concerns.
And for the benefit of the audience, if we scroll down up to page 3, I'm not sure if everyone has access to the document or access to it online, but it gives you a little bit more detail around classroom size. So when we think about investments on top of our staffing formula, classroom size, about $630,000 coming from the general fund, which is really the opportunity, the investment that goes into maintaining the arts programs, because the way the arts tax works. So there's dollars going there. SIA student investment account, to superintendent's comments, so that's $6.5 million. And then our ESSER one-time dollars, that's $7.3 million. And so these are the opportunity to start double clicking into how are these investments being organized and categorized across our community. And really, I think as we continue our conversation today and over the next few sessions, I know that like thinking back to my first time having this conversation with you all about a year ago, we said, hey, next time let's add another work session so that we can get time on the, and so when we approved the budget, approved the budget calendar, we added that work session on the 17th. So we do have an upcoming other work session on the 17th where we can continue the conversation. Obviously, the board will be presented with the budget to be approved on the 24th. So this, from a timeline perspective, the opportunities to engage and continue the dialogue. But we have time tonight to dive into this some more. We have our staff members here, but I know that there were also we want to spend some time on our staffing plan and the staffing formula. But before I turn it over to...
I'd like to just ask a question just on that same point. Because you said we're putting 14 million more in. Is that 14 net, or is that because the 89 staff that are going to be cut is a $10 million savings?
14 net in, I'm sorry.
Well, you made the statement that you're devoting $14 million for class size reduction, but the cutting of the 89 teaching positions is a $10 million savings. So is it actually just a net $4 million? And then a second follow-up question I have is, you talked about this divergence between revenue and expenditures, and I submitted a bunch of questions, but one of the questions was about the underspend that's occurring, and the projection that there's going to be a $6 million. Is that like an ongoing $6 million underspend? Because I'm just trying to reconcile we're diverging, and yet we're not spending all that was committed this year.
Yeah, and so with your first question, I'll need to just think through kind of like just to process that some more, and I think last time you saw me try to do math and talk at the same time didn't go so well.
That's okay.
But I will certainly get back to you on that. And with the second question, the distinction there is the budgeted expenditures versus like the actual expenditure. So over time, we don't spend. There's an opportunity where we budget a PD and 4 folks are going to travel somewhere for professional development, but ultimately only 3 end up going. So there's an underspend savings there. So with this current year, that underspend that would feed into our fund balance, so it becomes it's almost like ongoing savings so long as we don't tap into it. But
that will increase the ending fund balance. It just hasn't shown up yet.
It has, by about $6 million. However, the caveat there is we just wrapped up our 3rd quarter. So we're going to be assessing our 3rd quarter back to its iterative process. And once we are completed with 3rd quarter financials over the next 2 weeks, we'll then be able to refine that number even more, because we were looking at data from half the year, back in December into January. Takes us about 2 to 3 weeks to close a month and close all and do the refining there, which will then come back and say, okay, we were forecasting 90.5, so about $91 million, and now it looks like X. And so that's the opportunity that we do have in front of us, is to see how much of an underspend do we continue. But we also know, just from previous experiences, that as the year starts to end, there's an increase in spending. It's just like a natural trend that happens. So we try to account for that as well.
And can I just jump in on that, because I know Director Edwards, you've raised that question a couple of times. I just want to make sure we as a board are really clear. Underspending is normal, that every government does it. I know, let me just finish. Okay, because...
I'm trying to understand where it is.
Right, I know, but you continue to sort of ask about whether, and I'm gonna echo on that, because you cannot spend all your budget, because it would be illegal to overspend your budget, which is why government never spends 100%, cannot spend 100% of the budget. What Chief Dogadillo is saying is that we estimate what that natural underspend, the normal underspend, maybe in some governments it's 3%, some it's 5%, some it's 10%, depending on the nature of the function. That actually is ongoing, it's already factored into your calculations. There will likely be some additional underspend, which is one-time in nature. So your question is a good one, but I just want to make sure we're not thinking that we can solve any of the issues here. It may add a few $1 million of one-time resources, and once we know that, it's great.
Yeah,
Let's,
I don't
again,
think I
plug
suggested that it
dollars
was
in.
going to solve
No,
everything.
so let
I'm
me
just
put it
trying
a
to
different way.
reconcile.
Let me finish. Let me put it a different way. I want to make sure the public understands. I'm sure you get it deep in your core, because you've been doing this for so long. I want to make sure the public understands there is just a little bit of money there that might help, and it's great when it comes in. We'll learn about it in the next few weeks.
Correct.
I mean, that's just the natural ebb and flow.
The
of-
forecasting happens every government every year.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I also want to call out, yes, there's underspend, and that's a natural occurrence, but it's not. That's only one of the variables, right? I also want to account for the fact that we made some deliberate choices to, not that we're patting ourselves on the back, but there was direction from me to every department in the central office to cut X percentage last year and to cut their budgets moving forward, and to do our part, tightening our belt. And so some of that was easier to do because in a pandemic, it's hard to have professional development. So we could sort of, call it an underspend, call it an identified cut. It was still money to the pot. And so we wanted to make sure, and you saw it when we covered the numbers in the proposed budget. It was 6.5 and 7. It was like $13 million. That's not a small amount of money.
I have a question about that 14 million one-time money for teachers that you brought up, Dr. Brim-Edwards. And my understanding is that if we were to just do our staffing formula sort of the way we had talked about, we would not have those extra like 140 teachers. But because we are choosing to use one-time money, we're like adding back in. So we would have had 140 or so more cuts if we weren't using this one-time money. So it's actually that 4 million is how you talk about it, right? So we...
Yeah, and actually I'd like to just let, I appreciate that, but give us the official, because we need to be able to explain it out to the broader community, because it's like we're adding 14, but then we're taking away 10. It's just we need to be able to share what it means.
Yeah. I think to sum it up, it'd be that 7.3 million, that 6.5 million, and I'm pointing at the screen and looking at that, but I think y'all see it here. That's FTEs going to schools. Those are allocations going to schools. So without that specific investment, that would be less FTEs.
Represents a change to our staffing formula to decrease teacher-student ratios in our classrooms.
I think that's an important point, Director Constam. If we'd kept our staffing formula the same and experienced this enrollment, then we'd be at about 170 reduced positions. We made a strategic decision to diversify different revenue sources and try to maintain half of those, and which we've done. So you see only the 88. You see this, some of the single largest line items here are the 14.5 towards class size, followed by another 7.7 in direct student-facing counselors, social workers, mental health staff, for example, and the other large ticket items are the direct extended learning time like summer for our students.
I mean, sometimes I think when we get into the details, we miss some of the larger points, and I think it's worth making it totally clear that, as much as we have some targeted funds for specific, strategic activities, the vast majority of our revenue flows to us on a per student basis. So as we experience significant enrollment decline, we experience significant revenue decline. And that sounds extremely simplistic, but it sort of feels like it gets lost in the broader conversation.
So Chair, we can come back to any of these line items. We have staff who I'm sure would love some time in the spotlight if you have any questions on any of these items. But since we're wading into this issue of projections and class size, maybe this is a good time to have Dr. Adams review the information that's been posted, since we have updated information.
Thank you.
Also, while you're getting settled in, can somebody share how many positions are being held back for follow balancing? So hopefully we're going to have in a surprise enrollment bubble
As-
in the fall? I mean,
We are all hoping so. So
Yes.
I know we have at least a couple dozen, if not more, on reserve for that very reason. And of course, if we saw that kind of enrollment, please, everybody, we're open for business. Sign up. We certainly would staff them accordingly.
I have never been more poised to have projections be wrong than for a year like this. Thank you. Good evening, Director DePass. Chair DePass, Vice Chair Scott, Student Representative Weinberg, and Board Directors. I'm pleased to provide the updated class size information. I do want to mention, and I know it's not a popular thing for me to say, but the meta-analyses and the research on class size is actually mixed. There are many studies that say that class size matters and makes a difference in student achievement. There are also many studies that do not find that it makes a difference. Now, we do understand that class size is a very important topic to the community, and that's why we've made investments in class size. What we also know works is teacher capacity, teacher efficacy, high quality curricular and instructional materials, and that's why we're making investments in those areas, and I just wanted to highlight that at the beginning here. So you've had time to look at this spreadsheet of the projected class sizes. I'm pleased to say there have been some improvements, and so last time we spoke, there were about 20 elementary sections that were projected to be staffed at the class size maximum. That number is now down to 9, and so that means that 99% of our K-5 homerooms are projected to be below the class size maximums. Kara, if you could go to scroll down some pages, I'll tell you when to stop, because I don't know the page number off the top of my head.
maybe while scrolling down, you could give the class size maximums?
Sure. Right there, Kara, is great. So for our CSI schools, I'm going to go from kindergarten to grade 5. The maximums are 24, 26, 28, 28, 32, and 32. For our title schools, again from kindergarten to grade 5, the maximums are 28, 28, 28, 28, 32, 32. And then for all other schools, the maximum class sizes, again, kindergarten to grade 5, are 29, 31, 32, 33, 33, and 33. And so that is in keeping with our equity formula that drives more resources to students and schools that that have more underserved students and students living in poverty by direct certification percentage. And what I wanted to call to your attention is this actual histogram in the memo. This 3-colored histogram shows the class size number across the x-axis and the count of classes at that size at the elementary level up the y-axis. So as you can see, our CSI Title I schools have lower proportions of higher class sizes. Our Title I schools have lower proportions of the higher class sizes. And then our schools that are more affluent and do not have larger proportions of students with those extreme needs that we seek to serve have, that's where we see higher numbers of the class sizes that are toward the higher end. I do want to note that we fulfilled Representative Weinberg's request to have measures of central tendency. So you'll see that the average class size hovers close to 22. The mode, which is the most frequently occurring class size, projected is 22, and the median, or the class size number that divides all the class sizes right in the middle, is also 22. We also included those standard deviations to the very far right in the chart below that shows you how much variance there is among and between the class sizes. And so we continue to see our equitable use of resources displayed out in classrooms across PPS. This is very valuable. Thank you. I mean, one of the, a lot of the communications I'm getting right now are from some of those schools that are going to have maybe not right at the max, but within one or two, of the max. And I think, one of the questions that comes up then is, as you go through these maximums, and we had people testify these are too high. The question sort of becomes, what would it cost to reduce those? But I think what you're pointing out here, because we could, right, as a district, we could say, we're going to reduce that maximum by 1 or 2 students. But if we're applying a racial equity lens to this work, what you're saying is, yes, that would benefit those schools, which are not our CSI or Title I schools.
Correct.
In order to reduce, and you said it's about 10% that are at maximum right now?
There are only 10 classrooms.
Sorry.
We're
much more.
Right.
Yeah,
we're at 99%
10
projected to be
right
below
there.
the class size maximum.
So again, I think the policy question, and it's not an unreasonable question to ask. And if my child was in a class of 31 or 32, this is exactly what I would be saying. But the conversation we need to have as a community is, yes, we can solve that problem in that school. Those resources have to come from somewhere. And so the important question is where those resources would come from. And I don't think very many Portlanders would want those resources to come from Title I or CSI schools. So the question is there anywhere else where they could come from? And I think that is worth exploring. But again, kind of getting back to what you said about the research on this, are we better off using those resources where they are programmed, or are we better off taking those and putting them into class size? And what I heard you say at the beginning is, in your professional judgment, we're better off putting them where they are. That's in fact why you've programmed them where they are in their budget.
Again, it's a coherent set of strategies, the combination of, right? They're all levers, but so is time for intervention and supports, or professional learning, or other conditions in schools, or wraparounds, or extended learning opportunities. The kinds of things you see listed in our proposed budget.
I think the challenge, though, in our conversation with our community is that, as we see from all the email that we get, most of our community is not aware of the dramatic shifts that we have made in our staffing allocation formula and with our racial equity and social justice lens within the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, the way we budget for school staffing is dramatically different than it was 5 years ago in terms of the number of resources that we're driving toward our high poverty schools. And I think that has taken a while to take root in the community. I think some of our families who are at these high socioeconomic schools assume that maybe their neighbors in other schools are facing the same class sizes and not really seeing that we do have dramatic differences, and they're intentional differences because we're sending those resources to the children that we think need and deserve them the most.
This is a key point, Director Constam. I don't want to put her on the spot, but Dr. O, if you could come up. We were having a cabinet meeting yesterday morning, and she was making this exact point, and she sees the variability of need across the elementary school portfolio, and when you're investing in all of these different elements, in addition to class size, it's part of what's going to move the needle.
And I just want to say I appreciate seeing. I haven't been here as long as some of the others, but I appreciate actually leaning into and implementing our racial equity values. It does look different than it did 5 years ago. Equity means that we're going to direct more resources to where there's more need. And we had this presentation in December that showed our Black and brown, students, our families, our kids as a community are up to 2 years behind in achievement. How do we correct that? If that bothers us enough, then it means doing something different than we did 5 years ago. And so I appreciate it. And I appreciate my colleagues for talking about it too, because you called it out, and that's what it is. It does look different. It's intentional and welcome for those kids that we have a harder time reaching.
Good evening, Chair DePass and fellow directors, Superintendent Guerrero, and Student Rep Jackson Weber. I just do want to say that it is true the jury is still out on class size reductions and its impact on student academic achievement. There are actually 2 schools of thought, and both of them either dispel or support the impact of class size reduction on student achievement. What we really need to consider when we're talking about students and their needs is the configuration of the classrooms and the different things that we can do to support teachers in the classroom. For example, it is important for us to have very high expectations to have the necessary instructional materials, to be able to differentiate instruction within the classroom, to ensure that we do not have excessive number of students with special needs in certain classrooms, so that there is a balance. It's also very important to ensure that we have opportunities for teachers to collaborate, to attend high leverage professional development experiences, and to monitor student academic achievement on an ongoing basis in the classroom. It is not just about standardized testing, it is also about observations. It's about making teacher moves in the moment. It is also about connecting the family to what's actually happening in the classroom. Those are the things that change academic performance for students. Where the research seems to have some consensus in lowering class size for younger elementary, which would be pre-K through maybe third grade. And oftentimes that's why a lot of districts peg their reading standards and goals around the third grade.
So I'm going to offer just a non-educator's comment. I think we don't know what the class size research shows post-pandemic. So I think we should take that into consideration. And I kind of liked where, Director Scott, I thought you were going, or just looking at sort of where sort of the ends of the extreme were. And if I look at this list, I still see, you know, schools like George, Kellogg, and Ockley still having, well, they're not at the maximum, they're still in the 30s, and those are schools where we know the student achievement levels, even before the pandemic, were low. And I guess I'm just, you know, I know Director Green asked this at the very beginning, but like what about those schools? Because to me, I look at, well, there's some much higher income schools that in some cases have very similar. And, you know, I guess having been a parent of a middle schooler who really struggled, I do think that individual attention and staying on top of students and holding them accountable, you know, takes time. And so I just intuitively, I know the research is important, but I also know my own personal experience and experience of other parents, and it just seems like the middle grades, like that's high, and then coming out of the pandemic, and lots of kids weren't doing great before then. It just seems like, well, maybe, I mean, is there a way with a limited amount of FTE to address especially the schools that have more kids in need?
Well, one of the things I think would be helpful, I think I might have requested this before, is just to have a snapshot of the staffing in 2 different buildings. So, I mean, I agree that it's challenging our higher thresholds for our middle school students, but just to paint a picture for the community of these are the adults in the building at Rosa Parks. So looking at what the class size is just one piece of data, but then tell us who else is there serving students, you know, in terms of interventionists and, you know, all the mental health supports or whatever. Show us what that looks like at Rosa Parks or somewhere, and show us what that looks like at, you know, Brattle Mile, where we're hearing from a lot of families. Just because I think we digest it in a different way than just looking at the numbers. And especially for middle school, I think that would be really helpful, because those class sizes are hard to take, because we know our middle school students are really struggling, especially right now, and the thresholds are higher there. So even if they're under the thresholds, they're still really big, those classes. But help us understand who are all those other adults in the building helping those kids.
Just as a quick reaction, Director Consem, obviously we have prioritized class size. We're reporting $14.5 million to improve the staffing ratio equitably across need in our schools. We're also investing dozens more in learning acceleration teachers and specialists, precisely because we know the pandemic has impacted disproportionately students. And to your question around, you know, the overall faculty, you know, ratio per pupil, we call that out in volume 2. And you can go to any school and see, it's an average ratio, but you will see an obvious trend, the faculty ratio for certain schools versus another, how that's been weighted,
In fact, double in some
I
cases.
mean, I think it makes us feel better, but it doesn't change in the classroom that it doesn't. Yes, it helps the students, but they need more.
But
And
these are
at the end of the day, like whether a student is meeting science benchmark or math or reading is what's happened, language arts is what's happening in the classroom. And those other pieces are supports, but it's not what's happening. The teacher is the only one who's like doing assignments, grading assignments, giving feedback.
This is a misnomer that is part of the conversation sometimes, because if you go through some of our, especially our CSI, TSI schools, these extra supports, educators there for students they interface directly with students. They are working on academic, Dr. O, why am I saying this? Why don't you explain what they do? Because they are absolutely directly serving students throughout the course of a day. So can you kind of paint the picture for people who don't have a chance
And
to
Director
see that?
Constance, you are correct. That's the whole idea behind CSI schools. They have lower class size numbers, and they have a whole lot more personnel that are assigned to the schools to be able to support students. What needs to then happen there is everybody needs to be working towards the same goal. Everybody needs to be collaborating across teams, vertical, horizontally. We all do need to know students. It's a very strategic way of organizing a school to ensure that students are successful. Everybody from the custodian on up should all be about student achievement. And sometimes it is very difficult to communicate that, but with clear expectations, with the right resources, the right professional development, the in-time supports, the relevant and rigorous instructional practices, and just knowing how students learn, because there's a huge part of it that has to do with how students learn as well. And in middle school, we have to contend with kids coming of age, and them coming into their own identity, trying to identify their own personalities. So there are ways to structure middle schools to ensure that they are successful. And I think in essence, that's what we need to look at. We have lower class sizes at schools, at some of our CSI schools. Now we need to look at all the other supports that we need to have in the buildings, for the adults in the buildings, for the students in the buildings, for even the parents, so that they are on board and everybody is revolved and wrapped around the services that will help students achieve.
I have a quick question. So we have only 10 classrooms in the whole portfolio that have numbers that are higher.
It's actually 9.
That are-
I just
that are
want to be
not- I'm
clear.
sorry,
It's going down as we speak.
It was not higher. It was at 0.9 of the maximum.
There are 9 classrooms that are projected to be staffed at a class size maximum at the elementary level next year at this
Okay.
point in time.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And you'd mentioned a couple of schools, Ockley and George. I don't remember the other one, but
Tubman.
Kellogg is the other one.
Kellogg, okay.
The neighborhood program is 32, 30, 28, and 30.
Is there a class size minimum for middle school?
There is, for our title schools, it is 33. For our other schools, it's 34. And that is an adjustment we made this budget cycle.
So we lowered the class sizes for title this year to
For
33.
for all middle schools, yes.
For all middle schools. What was it prior to
It was
this year?
34 and 35.
Okay, so we've reduced it by 1 for all middle schools.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I didn't get quite to my question because my colleagues are so passionate. These are middle schools, and we said we wanted to focus on lowering class sizes at those early ages or early years where kids are learning to read, so they can actually enjoy middle school.
Right.
You have to be able to know how to read at the end of the 3rd grade is what I understand. And so I just wanted to ask if that was the reason that those schools that you referenced, and if, because
Well,
they do meet the free and reduced standard, I believe.
Actually, the data, our middle school data is not great, and so I would just say we still have a lot. If we're focusing resources on elementary school, I think it's an and conversation, because we have students who still need to be caught up because they didn't enter middle school reading or doing math at the 6th grade level, and so again, I just know from like I'm only speaking my personal experience is like individual attention and accountability and coaching from a teacher. And I'll say I talked to a principal of a very affluent school who was making the case of why they needed to have foundation funding, and they said because they have some students who need help with reading and having an EA in the classroom, and they're going to have 6 because of private funding, is that way the teacher can do small group reading to help those students who need help with reading, and the EA can be with the rest of the students. And to me, it's like super compelling. It's like, okay, I can see why you want to have private funding so you can do that. But then I'm thinking about what about all the schools that can't, Kellogg and these other schools can't do that. So, I mean,
I don't think anybody up here is going to disagree that our middle grade students, can't continue to use more supports. We know this is an area that's been challenging for us as a school system. There's a lot of work going on in our school communities. If I could trade out our regional superintendents here and bring up Ms. Calvert, as we work with our school principals around how to customize support plans. I want to thank my PAT leadership colleagues, who've been having the same conversation with me and us around, what does that look like? Because we've seen what that looks like, and maybe Margaret, you can cue in around what some of those tailored supports.
Comment on that, because to that point about EAs, that's a perfect point about how critically important they are. And I would just like to draw everyone's attention in volume 2 to the tables at the beginning, which show FTE by student, and a lot of those FTEs are EAs, and they're all these other support people. So they're not what we're looking at in terms of your student to teacher class size ratio, but they are exactly that. That's why George is near the top of the list in terms of adults in the building. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't be wonderful to lower the student ratio in every single classroom, but that we have to really expand our conversation to talk about all the supports and all the activities that are going and all the resources that are going into the building. Because if you look at this table, you'll see that our highest need schools have a lot of resources coming in, which is exactly how it should be. I just mean relative to our schools that are experiencing really high class sizes now.
And Director Combs, directors, this is what the budget proposes. We lowered class size in middle school, which is one bet. We also are betting on high-quality curricular materials, professional learning and capacity building for our educators, and more time for collaboration amongst educators in the building, because research shows that those work as well.
Before we go on, Director Hollins, it looks like you're talking, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I have a couple questions in regards to the class size enrollment piece. And I know we're talking about TSI schools, and I think I pointed this out before. Like, for instance, when I look at Sabin, we're still at 29 for kindergarten, 29 for first grade, 22 for second grade, 28 for third grade. Then when I turn and look at a TSI school like Irvington, which is 22, 2019 to 23. Then I look at Tubman, which, of course, we know we have a lot of issues there right now. They're at 27, 32, 28, 28. Roseway Heights, which is another school we've been having a lot of issues at 29, 28, 31, and 29. How do we mitigate some of those other things? And I know they've been looking, at adding additional people into the school buildings. But I want to tap into what Director Cossum said as far as, with all these other additional services, what outcomes are we having from this? Because when I walked into Tubman, the additional people and all that stuff, it doesn't really look like it's making a difference. When you have, substitute for the majority of the year, it doesn't really seem like it's making a difference, just that you're having more folks in the classroom. And then when I look at our budget piece, and I'm just putting it out there, when you look at our budget piece and you look at how we are spending our dollars, when the average teacher's salary is around $77,000 a year, our salary is average teacher salary is around $77,000 a year. We just authorized an $850,000 assessment that could have brought in a lot more teachers for this year. So when we're talking about budget and priorities, I want to make sure that we are not just talking about our budget and priorities, but we actually putting our money in where our mouth is. Because like I said, the outcomes is the issue that I'm having problem with when I look at a school and I see our kids in the hallways. They're not really responding in classrooms. I don't know what kind of teaching is going on in those schools, and this is what I'm seeing firsthand. So as we talk about prioritizing our budgets, I think we need to make sure that when these conversations come up, to have 29, 28, 31, and 29 students in a school like Roseway, or 29 for our first, second, third grade and Sabin. I just don't see that priority there.
So,
Ms. Calvert?
thank you. So there are a couple of points that I want to circle back to, and I appreciate the question around what is class size? What does it mean to have additional staff in the building? To your point, Director Brim-Edwards, the notion of an EA and what that allows a teacher to do in a classroom is to differentiate within the period. Having more adults in a room provides different opportunities and different teaching strategies to be implemented. So that is one thing that won't show up in the class size number because the EA is not part of that ratio, right? So I think that's one example. We also heard earlier this evening pieces around making sure that our students are seen, heard, and understood. Some of the investments that we've heard that we have thought about and worked on are around social workers to support students so that when they go into the classroom, they can engage. So again, that's not going to be something that shows up in class size, right? But it will show up in the FTE ratios at the schools. A third thing that we heard this evening was around, we heard pieces around restorative justice and needing restorative justice coordinators. And again, that's going to be something that is how do we prepare students that when they enter into a classroom that they have the best opportunity to learn and that they feel seen, heard, and understood. I think the other piece that I would say around some of the specific things and strategies that we have used when working with schools. Tubman is an example. One of the most important things is that the students are seeing adults that they have relationships with and that they know are known to them. And so part of what we've looked at with strategies is who are the people that we can have enter classrooms to help students make a transition if it is not an adult, like if there's a substitute teacher in a room, for example. So the more opportunities that we have with that within, it's not in the staffing model, but I'm just saying that these are some of the flexibilities that at different times of the year schools need to employ. And so there is this balance between direct teaching staff in a classroom and teachers, right, and the other educators that are in the building that are able to support and to work through. I think the other point in looking at class size is when we do this at a school, these are averages, right? And so Director, Student Representative Weinberg, thank you for it made me so happy to hear about, like, can we do the spread and the variability of what the classes are? Because it's exactly the right question. We lose a lot in averages. We lose a lot in what does that look like? And so when we're talking about class size, which classes, it doesn't matter which classes are what size. And I think that as we go through the details and sort of how that is showing up is really one of the things that's been helpful, and I appreciate Dr. Adams putting that data together. So I think the other part that when we look at some of the middle school pieces is we have some, we're fostering and building some DLI programs at some of the schools as well. And so you see this change between the neighborhood side and the DLI side, and I am not trying to say that this should be in competition. I'm not saying that at all, but we are investing in growing programs, and what that looks like in the middle school looks different than it does in the elementaries. And so in some of these schools, you'll see that there's a DLI program and a neighborhood program, and those numbers are not the same.
I'd like to ask a question. I think it may or may not have been answered. So I just want to, for the sake of clarity, when I look at it, and I'm just looking at the chart, everybody knows that I look at it from a lens of color. So when I think about George, that's a community. It's a low-income community, high poverty, high crime. I live there, so I'm safe to say that because it's my neighborhood. When I look at Tubman, same thing. When I look at Ockley, the same thing. When I look across the board in those areas, the numbers, 29, 30, 31, 30 for George, 27, 32, 28, 28 for Tubman, 34, 18, 30, and 25 for Ockley. And then I listened to Miss Calvert, Director Calvert. What do I call Superintendent Calvert, Miss Margaret. It's hard to, it's like you know him on personal level. That's my friend, so it's like, what do I call you in this setting? But when I look at that and I go across the board and I hear you, are you implying or are you telling us that in classrooms of this size, because you recognize it, that they're going to be, because we can't count the EA, that there's going to be 2 people in that class, so that instead of there being 1 teacher for 32 kids, that there's going to be 2 teachers, and then 1 can be assisting with learning while the other, and is that going to be consistent, like across the board? Like whenever there are 32 kids in the classroom, there will always be a second person in that classroom. I ask this because as much as the jury is out on whether or not lower class sizes are better for education and this, that, and the third, lower class sizes, higher class sizes, when there's a lot of kids in a classroom, the safety level, it begins to dissipate, right? Because, and I say that, whether or not they're learning, whether or not the stats, the data show that, they're learning more, I don't know. You can make data say whatever you want it to say, I honestly believe. And so and this is not, again, I'm not placating because I want stuff. I'm genuinely, this is where I'm at. In those classes, in those areas, in those neighborhoods, in those schools, higher class sizes is more opportunity for dangerous things to happen. And one teacher who is trying to figure out how to keep the rest of the classroom safe. Y'all always hear me talk about safety. I will always beat the drum of safety. One teacher trying to keep the classroom safe is hard to do when you got 32 kids. It's not the bulk of the kids that you have to be concerned about. It's the one kid who doesn't feel like they fit in that classroom, and so therefore they're trying to be funny and they're trying to do all these other things to hide the fact that they don't know how to read in this moment. So I'd rather act out because I don't want people to know that I can't read, because that's going to cause something else. So then these different things happen, and then that's how you can get a student chasing a teacher down the hallway with a pencil, and then the teacher then reporting that she didn't feel safe in her classroom, in her school, because the students were running rampant. And this has happened on not just one occasion, but on multiple occasions. So I'm very concerned about those schools, because those are black kids. We say, we're doing this about equity, and I hear everybody. And yet, the black and brown kids that need it the most, because if we look at our test scores, it is what it is. I love my neighborhood, I love my kids. But if you look at the test scores, they're not doing so great in that area. And so why are their classes higher? So are we saying, and I'm gonna get to a harsh question, actual questions, as I heard one of the guests say tonight, I'm gonna get to my hard ask so that I can get it out there. Are we saying that in every class where there's going to be more than 30 participants, students in the classroom, there will be a guaranteed second person in that classroom to help keep that class safe?
And following that, what's the financial piece of that? What does that look like? What does it look like to have?
Sure, I can appreciate
a second adult in those classes that Director.
Well, that's what she said. Yeah,
Let me start. Well, first of all, that this administration has always continued to build on an equitable distribution of resources. So when you call out schools like George or Tubman, you'll note very clearly they're funded at $12,500 plus per student. If you look at a middle school at the other side of town, it's closer to 7,000. So the decisions that are made at the local site level around how they use those resources, it's hard to look at middle schools strictly from a class size perspective but if you look at the faculty ratio and all the other personnel and decisions that are made at the site level with those additional funding streams, we're trying to sort of make sure that there's a capacity and an ability to identify what those additional supports, if there are additional people, could be. But we recognize that, not our middle schools have a variability of needs there, and we want to allow our middle schools, working with our secondary our principal supervisors and other teams, to identify, well, for our school improvement planning, where are the gaps, where are the opportunities and that we need to create, and which supports make the most sense for the students that we're serving. So I'll start with that as a response.
Superintendent, can I make a request to just, can we see what that FTE per student actually represents, like at George, where the number is basically 6 to 1? And can we see what that looks like at Jackson, where it's 12 to 1? And then, this is the right conversation we should be having. We should be looking at what are those supports intended to do? Are they getting the outcomes that we're looking for, to Gary's point? And, what would be the trade-off if there's, interest in lowering certain class sizes there? I mean, it's really, I think right now we're having the conversation without really knowing what all those other FTE are doing, how often they're in the classroom with the student, and just what it really looks like.
Sure.
We see it when we walk through, but it's hard to get the big whole picture.
And
We do have the numbers, though.
I would like an answer to Director Green's question, because just having been in middle schools this year, sometimes there's not even, there's a substitute. There's not two individuals. There's like one, and it's not even the teacher. So I think that's one thing. The other question I'd like to ask about that is in 2017, when we negotiated the PPS contract, we set targets which are lower than the maximum class sizes. And I think that's the whole discussion. I mean, we agreed that my assumption was the targets were what we thought were more like the ideal, not the maximum, and they're lower. And then the second thing is we realized that sometimes, because of whether there's one strand or two, or you have a bubble going through second grade, that if they were over a certain amount, two things could happen. You'd either get an EA, so there's another adult in the classroom, or the overages. And I'd like to know, like last year, or what our practice is, or the percentage of times when we give an EA versus just pay the overage. Is what I've heard is that, and this is just anecdotal, that teachers would rather have the EA than the overage pay. And so, I think that's another question. And again, so those are the three things, like targets versus maximums, Director Green's question, and then how often we actually provide an EA when they're over that increment over the target.
Okay, there's multiple parts there. I'll give an immediate response to a couple, and then we'll have to provide you something more articulated. As far as faculty ratios, you'll see it clearly in volume 2 there. You look at particular schools, their faculty ratio is 6 to 1. You look at other middle schools, sometimes on the other side of town, they're almost double that, 11.5 to 1. So already we know there are more people serving students in certain middle schools. Now, the question of, can we guarantee certain personnel, if we want to be prescriptive about the staffing model at middle schools, then that's a decision we can make. But then that takes away sort of some school-based planning and decision-making as well. So, how we want to balance that for them to tailor needs at the local level. And then as far as the exercise we go through a couple times a year when we reconcile class size actuals to the class size goals, which I was a proponent of, you'll recall. around making sure we have a more ideal number and that we do our best to meet it. And we've made every year incremental progress, even in this budget. These class size ratios have been the best that they've been, and we can always do better. There's a choice, right, that's made, right? The EA or the overage payment. We could go back to each of the prior semesters to see what that trend has looked like, whether it's been an overage payment, how much that sums up to, and or where there was a choice for an EA. And those are decisions that are made, between our supervisors and our school leaders to try to figure out which solution makes the most sense.
And Director Brimrivers, to your overages point, we have that question that you sent yesterday, and we're working on those answers. You'll have them soon.
Great, I appreciate that.
Director Hollins, did you have a question?
You got to unmute yourself, Gary.
Kind of talk a little bit about what the superintendent just spoke on, as far as this, time being the time where we have reduced class sizes. And I think while that's a plus, we have to also recognize that our kids' reading and math scores has been the lowest it's ever been as well. So I understand we're working on that as well, and we have to look at both sides of that coin. My thing is when the budget comes, when we're talking about the budget piece, and like I said, we're looking at it might be 12 people to one student in one school versus 6 in one or the other. But my question is, what are those 12 people doing to make sure that those kids are learning? That's
Great.
one. Other thing is, again, I go back to school and I look at even the PSI school.
We can't hear you,
Gary,
Director
Gary,
Hollins.
I'm sorry, Director Hollins, can you, your mic, move closer to your mic?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I go back to Clayton, which again, we're at.
Still can't
Now
hear you.
now we can't hear you again.
While he's collecting his thoughts, if we could have Dana Nuremberg come up and be ready to talk about how our learning specialists are going to address this exact area that Director Hollins is bringing up. Dana, if you mind, talk about what we're proposing to do with added learning specialists, to Director Hollins' point around making sure students are meeting our board goals at 3rd and 5th grade, for example.
Sure. Good evening. All, it's so nice to see you. So the targeted core model that the superintendent is referring to is to deploy a team of learning acceleration instructional specialists who will be teachers, who will be student facing. So we've identified, in collaboration with Dr. Adams' teams, the schools where we have the highest percentage and representation of Black and Native American students who are not yet meeting benchmark, despite the brilliance that we know they walk into school with every day. And the model is to provide intentional supports to these prioritized students that are aligned to our new high quality instructional materials. So rather than starting with an intervention mindset, starting way back in all the things you're missing, starting with more of an asset oriented mindset to scaffold to the grade level learning. So what that might look like, for example, for an 8th grader who is not yet performing at grade level, maybe a preview of the text they're gonna get in class, a preview of that vocabulary. So then when they walk into class, they have that increased confidence ready to go. It could be an opportunity to practice multisyllabic words, decoding those words in a smaller setting, so that again, when they go into the classroom and have access to that grade level core, they have more confidence and are more ready to tackle that important grade level work and learning. And so the intention is in 3rd grade to provide that kind of support around reading, in 5th grade provide that kind of support in math, and then in our middle schools provide that support around both ELA and math. And the schools that you've named are the schools that we plan to work with. So specifically for the middle schools, I'm gonna pull it out just because I don't want to misspeak, but for the middle schools.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
we can. It's
Yeah.
beautiful, crystal clear.
Okay, thank you.
Hang tight.
Should I continue? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
For our middle schools, specifically George, Tubman, Ockley, Lane, and then also supporting middle school students at Harrison Park and Fabian in the same way, to really center and prioritize our students, again, who we know are highly capable and motivated to do their very best, but to provide intentional scaffolds to provide support with their access to the grade level learning.
So can you just explain what that looks like? You know who the students are
Yes.
that you want to provide those targeted supports for. So what does that look like in the school day?
Sure, and so part of it is we're still building this, right? And so in partnership with the local schools, because as Superintendent Guerrero said, we're not being overly prescriptive, and yet we want to provide intentional supports. So what it will look like is providing support perhaps in the classroom as a co-teacher, or help support with small groups, depending on the model that the school opts for. It could be that this instructional specialist is providing support during a WIN block or an already existing intervention block. So really prioritizing these expert teachers to provide this support to those students to really prioritize their learning around the grade level standards and identifying those specific scaffolds that they need to really maximize the learning opportunity. Another component of this that I think is different from how we've operated before is these learning acceleration instructional specialists will be coming together weekly to really look at the data and look at how we're moving student learning. And when I say look at the data, that includes this work sample that the students produced today. And because we have these high quality instructors rolling out, students at George, 7th graders at George, 8th graders at George, and 8th graders at Tubman should have access to the same language arts learning opportunity. And so these learning acceleration instructional specialists will be able to say, this is the scaffold I provided, and this is how students did in my group. And then we can look at what they did in the classroom with an exit slip or an essay and look at the same thing and see how that's transferring again to the grade level work. So rather than focusing on a traditional model of intervention and starting with all of the sort of deficit mindset of what they don't have at all, really building their skills to what we know they can do.
So is that?
I think that is great. I think that is great. As a budget item, looking at this, how much are we allocating for our current budget for these new services or these new ways to reach those kids? That's one. And is that already part of the budget that the superintendent has already proposed?
Yes, it is. And we provide some of that detailed in the pivot table or in the report we were touching on earlier that was shared with directors today. Under address and finish learning as a result of the pandemic is one of the categories there.
But it also shows up in our general fund too in terms of our staffing formulas, right? I mean, there's these additional resources for learning recovery that come from our ESSER funds and that will go away. But does the type of interventions and supports that you just described also show up in the different staffing ratios from the general fund?
It does not. This is on top of what's in. There we go.
So just a question about the model. So all those schools that you mentioned that we're focusing on, are the students now going to be on a 7-period day, and is this like an extra period, or that they get the extra support? Say they get the lead in on the vocabulary in an extra class, and like what is that class? Is it they have it every day? Just.
Right. So that is still being worked on in collaboration with those schools as they're in the process of building their budgets. So some of our schools have an already scheduled WIN or what I need now time period where everybody has opportunity to additional supports. So where it can layer into those pieces at the schools that have that resource, layering it in there, also identifying the classrooms that might need the most support or where the students are served. So it's still being integrated, but also being mindful that when we provide additional supports to students, we want to do so in partnership with them and understanding where they are developmentally, right? So we also we want to be very conscious of stigmatizing students or othering students in any way. And so again, partnering with the school-based educators and the leaders in those buildings who know their buildings best.
I had two questions.
Go ahead, Jackson.
One clarification is, would these like push-in supports be included in the volume 2 for centrally allocated school resources? Or does it not play into the FTE to student ratio at all?
I'll need to get a clarification. My current thinking is that it's not part of that FTE as it's being fleshed out.
Okay.
But we can certainly come back and confirm that. It's resources on top of the existing resources.
Okay. And since we're using one-time funds, this will sunset next year, so we won't have this support next year, or we will?
So that goes to the question earlier, Jackson. If we have some remaining ESSER monies, we can choose that this is a high leverage strategy we want to have some level of. So we want to get a proof of concept here. We think it's going to be helpful. You're hearing that it's added personnel on top of already, better staffing or faculty ratios in these particular schools, and we think they need them.
But it could be eventually a trade-off that we have to decide of whether we keep it or don't.
That's true.
later.
Maybe we do less summer school and we keep year-round learning specialists instead.
I have a question about that. So if we're putting this as something that should be ongoing, why are we putting these with the ESSER funds versus out of the general fund budget?
So right now, one of the spirit of ESSER was to prototype, was to implement and roll out specific initiatives like this that are targeted. And as Dana shared, it's being fleshed out. It's being in collaboration with the middle schools and our school leaders on the ground. So it's fleshing out so that we can then determine what are then the opportunities to scale up or reassess. And ESSER lends itself to that. And that was like the goal of ESSER, to be able to create these opportunities. So to the previous comment, so that we can then reassess. Did it work? Do we need to reassess it? Does it become a part of the staffing formula? What are these other opportunities to consider? But the initial take is to leverage these one-time dollars to promote and explore these type of strategic and targeted opportunities.
But I get that, and it kind of remind me, in another world of R&D, right? The only issue I have with that is that if this is a successful program and we use up those ESSER funds that we have for this program, then we have to go to the general funds. Then it becomes a conversation of, once again, is that trying to balance what do we take away, what do we add type of piece. And I guess that's what, even with us already using a lot of our rainy day fund money or savings fund money, and this is a program that could be a plus. What are those other programs that we don't have anymore that could, for instance, the summer program, which, with the ongoing violence that we've been having, that wouldn't seem like that would be a program to shift on, to do something like this. So are we looking at a model for a way that we can do this and still be able to keep certain those other programs that we are modeling now?
And that's a great point, Director Hollins, and thinking about the other funding sources that we have to consider, like it's not a either or, but a and so I think about student investment account and what the opportunities look like over the next few years as another available funding source. That's a recurring funding source. There's other funding sources, whether it's Measure 98, whether it's Title I dollars, and these other opportunities to consider how we can, if the program's successful and folks like the results, how do we then continue? General fund is a critical funding source, but there are also these other opportunities that we're just going to have to reassess and also know that there's potential opportunities to increase funding there.
I can appreciate the question, Director Hollins, because I think what you're getting at is if some of our strategies are paying off dividends and improved outcomes for our kids, we want to make sure that we build them in sustainable ways. And I think by continuing to look at our outcome data, by continuing to watch and monitor very carefully how each of these different strategies are adding to those improved conditions and outcomes for our students, then we can make informed choices in the coming budget development and school year moving forward, because we're only going to be left with the ongoing monies, our general fund and SIA, and hopefully if we all advocate, maybe some QEM monies, and we can actually do all of it to the degree that we'd like to and create those conditions in our schools. So I'm mindful of directors probably have a lot of questions. If you want to dive into early learning, if you want to dive into professional learning, if you want to dive into robust summer programming, there were also a lot of questions about special education services. We certainly can shed light on none of those areas if you'd like.
So thank you, Superintendent. Actually, Chair DePass asked me to sort of put on the table if we could just do a lightning round of questions. This is after 9. We have 2 more meetings tonight after this one. If we could do sort of a lightning round to get your questions on the table. If they're easy answers, go ahead and give them. If it's something, and then I think the rest just put back in our Q&A document, which has been super helpful. So thank you for all the work on that. Director Green, you want to start off?
Thank you. No, I'll
I think it would be helpful to have another review and conversation around, especially ELL funding at high school.
And actually, maybe that one, because we did get some testimony, if we could spend a minute on.
That would be good. I think we have our ELD program managers virtually. If they could quickly speak to the ELD staffing formula, you'll actually find it on page 277 of volume 1. It's pretty explicit, but I know it can be misinterpreted. All of our students count for full funding. We give additional weight for level of language proficiency. I don't know if our ELD program managers are present.
They are virtual, so they may
Can
be
we
in the
bring
green
them in?
room.
Jennifer Anderson and Elena, Jennifer and Elena. But to earlier points, the model is additive. If you have 500 students, you get staff for 500 students, and then if 40 of those students are English learners, there is staffing allocated based on their level of English language acquisition.
There's Elena.
Hi, Elena.
Hi, good evening, members of the board, Superintendent Guerrero, and other PPS community members. My name is Elena Matija. I am the program administrator for K-5 ELD. I know I heard some testimony earlier as well with claims that we are not counting students as whole. And I think Superintendent Guerrero just spoke to that as well. So and I know it was also brought up that that's not an accurate statement and it's additive. So all of our students count as 1.0, and then the additional staffing that is provided for additional FTE for ELD staffing, we did use a proficiency model, ensuring that knowing that our students who are newcomers, specifically in our PISA program, but also throughout our district, or also students that are just emerging levels, proficiency levels, do require additional services. They require a higher amount and level of services than, for example, our students that are very close to exiting from ELD services. I did hear in testimony, one thing I would like to clarify is that none of our students were counted as zero. Any student who, after taking the ALPA this year, still qualifies for services will also be weighted for additional staffing. Also, to that point, I think it's important to know that this new staffing model increased FTE district-wide between both our licensed and classified. We were able to add 10 FTE. And if we did not change the staffing model and kept it the way it was, we in fact would not have added those positions. And we would have seen increased caseloads for teachers. So I don't know if there's any specific questions that you would like me to answer, but I do want to clarify some of those misconceptions. And we have shared this with teachers multiple times, that the staffing model is not taking away FTE, it is adding, we believe it does use an equity lens, and that it is looking at the different proficiency levels of the students and recognizing that they have different needs, and then staffing schools adequately for that to address those varying levels.
I appreciate the clarification, Elena. Thank you to you and Jennifer Anderson, your counterpart at the secondary level, for your work in ELD. So we just want to be really clear with our community. Our ELD classified students are counting for more than a whole. That differential is on top of, and it has resulted, given improved ratios, to 10 more staff.
Thank you for that clarification. That was one of my questions as well.
Great, and thank you for joining us this late. Appreciate you hanging in there for the meeting.
Thank you.
A couple quick ones. There was a question about minimum wage on July 1st. I think it's going to be $14.75 in Portland. I just assume we are, in fact, going to increase those wages to minimum wage. Just wanted to make sure that was on the record. And I will just say personally, I think it is worth continuing to look at that. And I know your team has been looking at that and how it fits into the overall wage scale, and whether we want to do some wage boosts overall for some of those staff. There's been testimony about reductions to special education. So a question I'll just put on for a more complete answer later is: are there reductions to special education funding, and if so, what are those reductions, and what's driving that? I would be interested in just learning a little bit more about that in the budget.
Director Buno, you think maybe an elevator response here? This is a complex area in our school system, special education services. Jay Buno, our director.
Good evening. Yes, that is a very complex response. But looking at a high level, when we look at allocating staff to our buildings, we are looking at the numbers of students that receive special education services in those buildings, and then also take into account the numbers of students that are in process. We've heard discussion of increased needs that have occurred in throughout this year, and so we do, as we're forecasting for need in the buildings, take those students into account, and then based upon our staffing formulas, which in our K-8 levels are on average around 26 students, we then allocate teaching resources and paraeducator resources to buildings. So the numbers and what is allocated is based upon the numbers of students that we have to serve projected for next year. Our numbers for next year are projected in and around the same level we have right now, which is a decline in the number of students served from the last 2 years. And so there has been some adjustments because of that.
My question was about the that multiplier effect, or that students weren't counted as a whole student. That was my burning question. And I'm also listening to learn about the trade-offs that we're talking about when we redirect, or when we direct funding to where there's more need.
So I've just two things. I've submitted a ton of questions, but so two areas that I wanted to ask about. And the first, I'm not expecting an answer tonight, but I know that next week we'll probably have more discussion about it when we get the Southeast Guiding Coalition. But for the last year, schools in Southeast have been living with lots of uncertainty and disruptions, and I'll just call out both Lent and Bridger are going to have another year. I mean, essentially, the neighborhood school model for both of those schools is going to be changing. And in the community meetings that were held, a request for very specific FTE and other supports for those students. I say two schools, and Lent being a school of very, very high need. So as we head into the budget, I guess I'm going to want to, I know that Deputy Superintendent Hertz has potentially recommending 10 FTE, but I'd like to have a better sense of that through the budget process, of what sort of supports those, specifically those two schools, but other schools that are having, 27,000 households are gonna, potentially having new school boundaries. There's just a lot of uncertainty and a feeling of like, should I commit to my neighborhood school because it's all going to change? So I'm going to want to better understand how we're going to support those school communities to set them up for success, including the Harrison Park and the other transitions that's going to happen next year. So that's one thing. And then the second item, and this, I guess, if we're going to have another discussion, I can either get it later or somebody could answer it now. But in the earlier PowerPoint we had from the last meeting, it had central office identified 7 million in savings, primarily in materials and supplies. And then when we got the budget detail in the answer, it actually looked like 18.73 were FTE reductions in SPED, and that's 4.6, and then this is the 7, and then there was 2.6 in supplies. So I'm just curious, because it says materials and supplies in the PowerPoint, but it actually looks like a 4.6 in people. There's also a sweep of vacant custodian positions, so I'm just curious about that. And the second question about those two buckets is, are those ongoing savings or reductions, or are those one time for next year? Originally was going to ask if they're one time for next year for the materials, but it looks like they're also, the majority of it actually is FTE. I don't know who's got that question.
I can quickly answer that. So for the sweep that occurred this year, that was underspend. So these eventually, there were no reductions made this current year.
Yeah.
For FY23, those are permanent. So that's they would be ongoing savings.
And there's just been a shift since the PowerPoint. It's not materials and supplies. It's now, that's 1/3 and the other 2/3 is, and the custodians, like those school custodians or central office custodians?
We can get back to you to get those details. I don't know if Dan's here to, but we can get back. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have 2 more meetings to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I won't, we're going to talk a lot next week about the charge that the board gave to staff. And part of it was about giving middle grade students in the Southeast a more comprehensive experience. And I think that's the goal here, that, and supports and opportunities for them. So, we can get into sort of what that looks like, which I think, we're trying our best to make sure that we satisfy, the various charges that was given to staff.
Yeah, and I mainly bring it up because there was a very specific ask for representation at the board table. As these communities have been living this now for a year, and really feeling like, as things settle out with the recommendation, a concern about next year and the transitions.
I just want to repeat my request if we could just see a snapshot. It'd be great to see for a middle school, 2 middle schools and 2 elementary schools, so we just have a better sense of what that FTE per student represents at sort of the different ends of the spectrum. I think that'd be really helpful. And also around on that same question, help us understand how much discretion principals have in deploying that FTE. I'd be interested in understanding that better. And I had a question about our number of school psychs, school psychologists. So where are we overall in terms of adds or subtractions, and where are we, and help us understand how those resources are deployed. How is it determined where they go, and how much coverage schools get, and also where we are relative to last year. And my last question is just around our chronically unfilled positions. What are they, and what do we need to do to change that dynamic? I mean, we obviously know that that's a really pressing issue with our custodians, and we're I think in the process of addressing that with their bargaining unit, but I think it's still an issue with EAs and maybe speech language pathologists. I don't know. So I'd like to know, what are those areas where it's chronically difficult for us to hire but critical for our students, and what do we need to do about it?
I'd love more information on, in the budget, there's an increase of about 20 FTE for licensed staff. I'd love more information about where we're decreasing and where we're increasing under that umbrella. Also, we have budgeted $2.5 million for PAT overload pay, and we've already budgeted for classified, which are typically EAs. So I'd love to see where we're putting EAs and where we're deciding to do the PAT overload pay, to understand like where we would make that decision. And then more information about the hourly pay for classified representative, that's cafeteria staff and maintenance workers. Also to Director Constam's point about maintenance staff openings, and also the savings we've had since we've budgeted for those over the past few years. Also, we transitioned to a new nomenclature for special education, so just more information on what SES, CB, and ISC classrooms mean, and also the size ranges for those. And I'll send the other ones I have.
Thanks. Director Hollins, did you have additional questions?
Yes, I do. I have quite a few, so I'll save them now. And if you guys need me to, I can send these questions in as well. So I'm gonna just say the questions. You don't have to answer them. I just want to make sure that they get out there. So I know, looking at the budget, what our current fund balances are. I want to know how those compare over the last 5 years. You know, especially when you talk about like our non-dispensable restricted funds, committed funds, line funds. Um, Also, I would like to know how long with our current fund balance, um, if all the other revenues were to dry up and expenses were to remain the same, how long would that current fund balance carry us? Um, when we talk about assumptions on our budget, and how those assumptions has changed in the last 5 years, I just want to know how accurate have we been, over those last 5 years, that we have done our budgets. And this is just for me to help understand how we move forward in the next 5 years. Because I know we're looking and focusing on this year's budget, but I always try to look 5, 10 years out and kind of see, how those funds and how those budgets could look, over the next 5 years. Like I said, I know it's important that we talk about this year, but I really want to start looking at how the decisions we make this year affects, the next 5, 10 years out. When we talk about our current staffing ratios, how those ratios changed in the past 5 years, and by looking at those trends for the last 5 years, what are we looking at those trends for the next 5 years? And I think that kind of goes with some of the other ones that they have asked. Only got two more. Actually, just one more. When we talk about our pay systems, faculty, staff, compensation, salary, how do we compare with other districts in our market? And the reason why I ask that is, how are we looking at recruiting? Some of the things that I've looked at as far as other districts and how they are able to obtain some staff, as well, are getting new staff. If they offering higher salaries to beginning teachers, and then the slower growth over experience pay over time. So just looking at how we're looking at that, especially when we're talking about getting culturally specific teachers into our district, how we looking at how we're reaching out to those folks as well. And those are my questions, and I can send those in as well if you need me to. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Hollins. I was just going to appreciate, just to Director Hollins and all the other directors, again, as we said at the beginning, we're noting all of these. We'll offer written responses. These are important areas that Director Hollins is pointing out. Certainly we can try to put together the various comp studies we have done. I appreciate the question looking beyond this budget. What's a sketch of a long-term forecast here? Because we do want to be responsible. I don't want to think about what it's going to look like when we don't have $75 million in ESSER monies, and what kind of advocacy then do we need to do and focus on, and what choices are we going to have to make? I appreciate Senior Director Jay Buno here talking about special education services and level, but we have important work to do in that area, and we're excited that he's joined Team PPS here, because as you'll be learning from all the various reviews we've had, we want to be a more inclusive school district in our practices. We've got to take a hard look at our service delivery model. Our referral rate is out of proportion for a district our size. And so this is a deep topic. Down the road, I hope we have a thorough work session on. And also, we're taking the opportunity to make some really forward-thinking and some exciting work, whether it's early education or it's our workforce diversity and development. I spent half my day today in various state-level meetings around sort of those pipelines, so we have culturally responsive and diverse employees across different groups. So there's a lot of ongoing work that we have to do there. But appreciate all your questions this evening, and as we did before, we'll try to get you as complete of answers as the team can bring together, and we'll keep having this conversation.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you, colleagues, for your questions, and we've captured them, I hope, and the recaps have been very valuable. So the list of questions and the responses. I'm going to adjourn us now so we can get on to our next two meetings, which were, I believe, supposed to start about an hour ago. That would be the superintendent's evaluation and discussion of labor negotiations. Thank you. We are adjourned.